In the spring of 1887, the washhouse behind the old hotel in Silver Creek, Colorado, breathed steam before the sun came up. Every morning, Miriam Vale unlocked the back door while the town was still gray and quiet. She carried 2 buckets from the pump, set the copper kettle over the stove, and waited for the first curl of heat to rise. By the time the freight wagons began rattling along Main Street, her sleeves were already rolled, her hair was pinned tight, and her hands were red from soap and lye. People in Silver Creek said Miriam was a strong woman. They said it because she never asked for help. They said it because her husband had been dead 4 years and she had not broken in public. They said it because she took in laundry from miners, railroad men, travelers, widowers, and families who had too many children and not enough hours in a day. They said it because she paid her rent on time and kept her small room behind the washhouse neat enough for a preacher's visit. But strength, Miriam had learned, was often just loneliness with its back straight. That morning, she was hanging white sheets on the line when she saw the stagecoach stop in front of the hotel. At first, she barely looked. New faces came through Silver Creek every week, prospectors with empty pockets, mothers following husbands to mining claims, broken men heading west because they had already failed somewhere east. The town had become a place where people arrived carrying stories they did not want to tell. Then a man stepped down from the stage with a little girl in his arms. Miriam's hands went still on the wet sheet. The man was tall, though thinner than he had once been. His hat was dark with dust, his coat patched at the elbow, and his beard had grown rough along his jaw. But she knew the way he stood before she knew his face. She knew the careful way his shoulders bent around the child, as though his whole body had become a shelter. Jonah Mercer. For a moment the town disappeared. The wagons, the hotel porch, the sheets snapping in the wind, the steam rising from the washhouse roof, all of it fell away. Miriam saw him as he had been 17 years old, standing beside the creek with his boots in the water, promising he would come back after he found work in Leadville. She saw the boy who had carved her initials into the handle of a wooden comb. She saw the young man who had kissed her once beneath a cottonwood tree, then left before summer ended. He had not written after the first year. She had married Edwin Vale because her mother was sick, because a poor girl could not wait forever, and because Edwin had offered a steady home without asking for too much of her heart. Now Edwin was in the cemetery on the hill, and Jonah Mercer was standing in the street with a child pressed against his chest. The little girl looked about 5 years old. Her face was pale with travel, and her dark hair had come loose from 2 uneven braids. One small arm rested around Jonah's neck. The other held a cracked wooden horse against her chest. Jonah turned toward the hotel door, then stopped. His eyes found Miriam. The years between them moved like a shadow across his face. Miriam's heart struck hard once, then seemed to forget its own rhythm. Jonah removed his hat slowly. Miriam. His voice was lower now, rougher, but it carried the same quiet gentleness that had once made her foolish enough to believe waiting was easy. She let the wet sheet drop against the line. Jonah Mercer. The little girl lifted her head. Her eyes moved from Miriam to the steaming washhouse behind her. Jonah shifted the child in his arms. This is Ruthie. Miriam looked at the child again. Ruthie watched her with the grave, careful stare of a little girl who had learned to measure grown people before trusting them. Is she yours? Miriam asked. Jonah nodded. His hand moved over the child's back. My daughter. The words should not have hurt. Miriam had no right to feel the sting of them. She had lived a whole life after him. She had worn a wedding ring, buried a husband, and learned to sleep alone in a narrow bed without weeping. Still, something old and tender twisted inside her. Where is her mother? Miriam asked softly. Jonah looked down at the dust between his boots. Gone. Not dead, not yet. Just gone. Miriam understood enough from that single word. Some losses came with graves. Others came with empty doorways, unanswered questions, and children who kept waiting for footsteps that never returned. Ruthie coughed against Jonah's collar. It was a dry, tired sound. Miriam's eyes sharpened. How long has she been traveling? 4 days from Pueblo. We rode partway in a freight wagon before I had coin for the stage. Has she eaten? Jonah's jaw tightened. A little yesterday. Miriam glanced toward the hotel. The front door was already open, and Mrs. Dobbins, the hotel keeper, stood inside watching with narrow interest. Silver Creek fed on stories faster than horses fed on oats. Jonah seemed to notice the staring faces too. Shame passed across him like a cloud. I only came because I heard the mill might be hiring, he said. I did not know you were here. Miriam almost laughed at the cruelty of it. For 12 years she had wondered where he had gone, whether he had forgotten her, whether he had married happily and built the kind of home he used to describe by the creek. Now he had come back into her life with dust on his coat and a hungry child in his arms, and he claimed it was an accident. Maybe it was. Maybe that made it worse. Ruthie coughed again and whispered something into Jonah's vest. What did she say? Miriam asked. Jonah closed his eyes for a brief second. She asked if there is bread. The old hurt inside Miriam did not vanish. It simply moved aside for something more urgent. She walked to the washhouse door and opened it wide. Warm air rolled out, carrying the smell of soap, wet cotton, and coffee she had boiled too strong before dawn. Bring her inside, Miriam said. Jonah did not move. Miriam, I am not here to trouble you. You are already troubling me by standing there while that child is hungry. His eyes lifted to hers. A faint memory flickered between them, the way she used to speak plainly when others softened lies. I can pay when I find work, he said. I did not ask for payment. That is what worries me. Miriam's fingers tightened on the doorframe. Then hear me plain. I have more laundry than 2 hands can finish. The hotel sheets must be boiled, the miners' clothes must be scrubbed, and the roof over my drying shed leaks every time the mountain rain comes. You need food for your daughter. I need someone strong enough to carry water and honest enough not to steal from the pocket of a dead man's coat. Jonah looked toward the washhouse, then back at her. His face carried exhaustion, pride, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. And after the work is done, he asked. Miriam's voice softened despite herself. Then we will decide whether you only came to Silver Creek for wages, she said, or whether the road finally brought you back to the place you should have explained before you left. Jonah flinched, but he did not turn away. Ruthie lifted her head from his shoulder and looked into the warm room. Her small voice came thin and uncertain. Is it safe? The question struck Miriam harder than any greeting Jonah could have given. She stepped aside and held the door open wider. For today, she said gently, it is. Jonah carried his daughter across the threshold. The little girl looked around at the copper kettle, the folded towels, the narrow cot near the stove, and the single window where Miriam always left a lamp burning after dark. Her eyes stayed on that lamp as though light itself was something rare. Outside, Silver Creek began its noisy morning. Wheels groaned, men shouted, the hotel bell rang for breakfast. But inside the washhouse, for one breathless moment, there were only 3 people standing in the steam. A widow who had taught herself not to wait. A father who had arrived with nothing but a child and an old regret. And a little girl who looked at a laundry room as though it might become the first safe place she had ever known. Ruthie ate sitting on the edge of Miriam's cot, with both feet tucked beneath her skirt. Miriam gave her a slice of bread softened in warm milk and a spoonful of peach preserves from the jar she had been saving for Sunday. The child held the bowl with both hands as if somebody might take it back. She did not eat quickly. She took small bites, watched the door, then looked at Jonah after every swallow. "She can have more," Miriam said. Jonah stood near the stove, hat still in his hands. "She knows." But Ruthie did not know. Miriam could see that plainly. The little girl had learned that hunger sometimes returned before morning. She had learned to leave a little in the bowl because tomorrow was never certain. Miriam bent to her level. "There is enough for you here." Ruthie looked at the bread, then at Miriam. "For Papa too." Miriam glanced at Jonah. His face turned away, but not before she saw the grief tighten around his eyes. "Yes," Miriam said, "for your Papa too." Only then did Ruthie push the bowl toward him with both small hands. Jonah crossed the room slowly and knelt before her. "You finish yours, Dove." She shook her head. "You didn't eat." "I did." "No." The child's voice was soft but stubborn. Miriam took another slice of bread from the tin and set it on a chipped blue plate. She added the last of the preserves without comment and placed it in Jonah's hand. He stared at it. "Miriam, eat before you fall through my floorboards." That almost brought a smile to his mouth. Almost. He sat on the far end of the cot, careful to leave space between himself and the child, as though even comfort had rules he did not want to break inside Miriam's room. Miriam turned back to the laundry. The copper kettle had begun to simmer. Steam rose over the tubs, softening the air until the windows blurred white around the edges. She stirred the linens with a wooden paddle and tried to act as if her whole past had not just walked into her washhouse. Jonah Mercer. She had spoken his name many times in her head over the years, first like a prayer, then like a wound, then like something she refused to touch. When Edwin had asked for her hand, she had told herself that Jonah had chosen silence. When Edwin died, she had told herself it was better Jonah never returned, because she had already buried one life and could not bear to dig up another. Yet there he was, eating bread beside the stove, with his daughter watching him like he was the last wall between her and the world. "Where did you come from before Pueblo?" Miriam asked. Jonah swallowed and looked at Ruthie before answering. "South of Cannon City for a time. Before that, a rail grading camp near Raton Pass." "Doing what?" "Whatever paid, hauling ties, mending harness, breaking stone. I worked in a livery one winter." "And Ruthie's mother?" The little girl's spoon stopped. Jonah's eyes warned her gently, not angrily. Miriam understood. Some truths were too heavy to place in front of a child while she held a bowl of warm milk. "Later," Jonah said. Miriam nodded and said no more. For the next hour, the washhouse filled with the rhythm of work. Miriam rinsed linens, wrung collars, scrubbed cuffs, and hung damp shirts from lines strung across the room. Jonah stood only when Ruthie had eaten enough to make her eyelids droop. He carried water from the pump in 2 buckets at a time, moving stiffly from exhaustion but never complaining. Ruthie watched him from the cot. When he disappeared outside, her face tightened. When he returned, she breathed again. After the 6th trip, Miriam spoke without looking up. "You can leave the buckets near the door." Jonah set them down. "I can do more." "You can sit before you shame me by fainting in my washhouse." "I do not faint." "You used to say that before falling asleep standing against fence posts." He froze. The memory had escaped her before she could stop it. A younger Jonah had once worked 12 hours for Mr. Ardle's cattle crew, then claimed he was not tired while leaning against a gate, eyes closed, hat sinking over his nose. Miriam had laughed so hard that afternoon she dropped half a basket of apples in the dust. Jonah looked at her now, with something unguarded in his face. "You remember that?" Miriam gripped a wet collar and twisted it hard. "I remember many things I would rather not." The softness left his expression. He looked down at his hands, rough and reddened from the bucket handles. "So do I." Silence settled between them, thick with steam and unfinished questions. Ruthie's head dipped forward. Her wooden horse slipped from her fingers and landed softly on the cot. Jonah moved at once, but Miriam reached the child first. She caught Ruthie by the shoulder before she could topple sideways. The little girl startled awake with a sharp gasp. "No," she cried, suddenly panicked. "No, I'm awake." Jonah was beside her in one step. "Easy, dove, nobody is angry." Ruthie clutched his sleeve. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for someone. Miriam sat back slowly. "Did I frighten her?" Jonah gathered Ruthie close. "She wakes hard sometimes." "Why?" He stroked the child's hair and his voice lowered. "Because sleep was not always safe where we stayed." Miriam's throat tightened. Ruthie pressed her face into Jonah's vest. "Don't let Miss Tamsin take me." Jonah closed his eyes, pain crossing his face. Miriam stayed still. "Who is Miss Tamsin?" "A woman at the last boarding room," he said. "She watched Ruthie while I worked. I thought she was kind." Ruthie's fingers clenched in his shirt. Jonah's mouth hardened, not with rage but with shame. She was not. Miriam did not ask for details. The child's fear was enough. She rose and took the old quilt from the hook beside the stove. It had faded to brown and blue after years of washing, but it was soft. Edwin's mother had made it long before Miriam married him. Miriam had kept it folded because using it hurt too much in winter. She held it out to Jonah. "For her," she said. Jonah stared at the quilt. "That looks fine made." "It is only cloth if it stays on a hook." He took it carefully. Ruthie let him wrap it around her shoulders, but her eyes followed Miriam. Miriam softened her voice. "No one named Tamsin is here." Ruthie sniffed. "You promise." Miriam had learned not to make promises lightly. Promises were living things. If they died, they left ghosts. "I promise you this," she said. "No one will touch you in my washhouse unless your papa says it is all right." Ruthie studied her for a long, solemn moment. Then she nodded once and leaned back into Jonah's arms. By noon, the town had fully woken. Men came to the hotel kitchen door with sacks of laundry. A miner named Holly's brought shirts stiff with red clay. Mrs. Dobbins sent down a stack of sheets and a stair sharp enough to cut thread. 2 railway men passed by the open door and slowed when they saw Jonah inside. Miriam felt the gossip forming before anyone spoke. Silver Creek had not forgotten that she had once walked beside Jonah Mercer on Sundays. It had not forgotten Edwin Vale either, a quiet husband who had paid his bills, fixed church pews, and died with Miriam holding a damp cloth to his forehead. In a town that measured women by how long they mourned and how quietly they lived afterward, a widow opening her door to an old love would become a feast. Mrs. Dobbins lingered near the threshold, with her arms folded. "Need extra hands today, do you?" she asked. Miriam took a bundle of sheets from her. "Looks that way." Mrs. Dobbins' gaze moved to Jonah. "You hiring strangers now?" "He is not a stranger." "No," Mrs. Dobbins said slowly. "That is what concerns decent folks." Jonah set down the bucket he had been carrying. "Ma'am, I can leave if my being here causes Miriam trouble." Miriam turned so sharply that steam curled around her face. "You will not speak for me in my own washhouse." Mrs. Dobbins' eyebrows lifted. Miriam faced the hotel keeper. "I pay rent for this room and this work yard. The laundry is mine to run. The help I hire is mine to choose." "People will talk." "People have been talking since Eve tasted the apple. It has not improved them." A cough of laughter came from Holly's near the door. He quickly looked down at his boots. Mrs. Dobbins' face colored. "I only meant to protect your reputation." "My reputation has hands red from scrubbing your sheets," Miriam said. "It can protect itself." For several seconds, no one moved. Then Mrs. Dobbins gave a stiff nod and returned inside. Miriam lifted another armful of linen as though her heart were not pounding beneath her bodice. She did not look at Jonah. But Jonah looked at her. She could feel it. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "I did. Because of me. Because of me." That answer silenced him. The afternoon heat settled heavy over Silver Creek. The mountains stood blue and distant beyond the town, their peaks still holding traces of old snow. Mud from yesterday's rain dried into pale ridges along Main Street. Horses stamped and flicked flies in front of the hotel. Somewhere near the blacksmith shop, a hammer rang steady against iron. Inside the washhouse, Ruthie slept at last. She lay curled on the cot beneath the quilt, one hand wrapped around her cracked wooden horse. Her small mouth was parted, and her brow finally rested smooth. Jonah worked more quietly after that. He lifted tubs instead of dragging them. He closed the door with care. He stepped lightly for a man so worn down by the road. Miriam watched him from the corner of her eye. He had changed. The young man she remembered had been full of impossible plans. He had spoken of buying land where the grass rolled high and building a house with a blue door because Miriam once said blue looked cheerful in winter. He had been poor, yes, but bright with wanting. This Jonah wanted only enough to get through the next hour without failing his child. That was a different kind of poverty. Near sundown, when the last shirts had been hung and the last bucket emptied, Miriam found Jonah outside fixing the latch on her drying shed. He had noticed the broken hinge without being asked. The sight stirred something inside her she did not welcome. "You always did men things when you were avoiding a conversation," she said. His hand stilled on the latch. The sky above the alley glowed pale gold. Smoke from supper stoves drifted over the rooftops. Ruthie still slept inside. Jonah kept his back to Miriam. "I figured I owed you the hinge before I owed you the truth. The truth is 12 years late. The hinge could have waited." He let out a breath, then turned. In the fading light, he looked older than he had in the morning. Lines bracketed his mouth. Dust clung to his collar. His eyes were tired but steady. "I left Silver Creek because my brother was hurt in a mine collapse near Leadville," he said. "I meant to work one season, earn enough, come back respectable." "You wrote for a while." "I wrote every month." Miriam's chest tightened. "No," she said, "you wrote 3 letters, then nothing." "I wrote until your mother answered." The world seemed to narrow to the creak of the drying lines. "My mother." Jonah nodded slowly. "She said you were promised to Edwin Vale. She said you had cried some, but you were practical and wished me well. She told me not to shame you by coming back poor." Miriam felt the blood drain from her face. Her mother had been ill that year, frightened, worried about debts, desperate to see Miriam settled before death took her. Miriam had never doubted that grief made people grasp at safety, but she had not known her mother's fear had reached across miles and cut the last thread between them. "That cannot be," Miriam whispered. Jonah reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a folded paper, softened at the creases from years of handling. "I kept it because I hated it, then because it was all I had left of the girl who once believed in me." He held it out. Miriam stared at the letter. Her mother's hand was there, unmistakable, slanted, careful, weak near the end. Miriam did not take it. Not yet. Because if she touched that letter, part of her life would change shape. All those years she had believed Jonah forgot her. All those years Jonah had believed she chose security over him. Between them stood not a villain, not cruelty, not betrayal, but a dying woman's fear and 2 young hearts too poor to fight distance. Miriam looked toward the washhouse window. Ruthie had woken. The child stood behind the glass, wrapped in the quilt, watching them both with frightened eyes. Jonah folded the letter again and put it away. "Not tonight," he said softly. "She has had enough sorrow for one day." Miriam swallowed the ache in her throat. For the first time since seeing him step off the stage, her anger did not know where to stand. Jonah picked up his hat. "There is a shed behind the livery. They may let me sleep there if I clean stalls." Miriam looked at Ruthie, then at the narrow cot, then at the lamp glowing in the washhouse window. "No," she said. Jonah's eyes searched hers. Miriam opened the door and felt the warmth of the room touch her back. "Your daughter asked if this place was safe," she said. "I will not make myself a liar before nightfall." He tried to speak, but no words came. Miriam stepped aside. "Bring in the last bucket," she said, her voice unsteady but firm. "Then bolt the door." Jonah nodded once. When he passed her, their shoulders nearly touched. Inside, Ruthie reached for his hand and then shyly, for Miriam's sleeve. Miriam looked down at those small fingers holding her faded cuff. The washhouse had never felt smaller. It had never felt warmer. And as the lamp burned bright against the darkening window, Miriam understood with quiet fear that some doors, once opened, did not lead back to the life a person had carefully built. They led forward. By morning, the whole town knew Jonah Mercer had slept behind Miriam Vale's washhouse. No one said it plainly at first. Silver Creek had too much church-going pride for that. Instead, women lowered their voices when Miriam passed the hotel kitchen. Men looked twice at Jonah when he crossed the alley with empty buckets. Mrs. Dobbins served breakfast with the sharp silence of a woman who wanted every spoon on every plate to sound like judgment. Miriam heard all of it without needing words. She had lived in Silver Creek long enough to know how gossip moved. It slipped under doors. It rode in flour sacks and church pews. It stood beside water pumps pretending to discuss weather while cutting a woman's life into pieces small enough for strangers to chew. Jonah noticed too. He stayed outside most of the morning, fixing the sagging wash line posts and scraping old mud from the drainage ditch behind the hotel. He worked with his head down, jaw tight, as if every whispered glance belonged on his back alone. Ruthie stayed close to Miriam. The little girl had woken before dawn with one hand tangled in the quilt and the other gripping her wooden horse. She had not cried, but her eyes had gone wide in the dim room until she saw Jonah sleeping on a pallet near the door. Only then had she breathed easy. Miriam had pretended not to see. She busied herself lighting the stove and measuring coffee, but the sight had stayed with her. A child should wake thinking of breakfast, not checking whether the one person she trusted had vanished. By mid-morning, Miriam set Ruthie on a stool beside the folding table and gave her a basket of clean handkerchiefs. "Fold them once this way," Miriam said, showing her, "then again corner to corner." Ruthie copied the movement with great seriousness. Her first handkerchief came out crooked and soft as a wilted flower. Miriam smiled. "That one has character." Ruthie looked worried. "Is character bad?" "No, it means it has survived being handled." The child considered that. Then she placed the folded handkerchief carefully in the basket and tried another. Jonah stepped inside carrying 2 buckets. His gaze fell on Ruthie, then on Miriam. Something passed across his face, gentle and aching. "She has never had much chance to help with ordinary things," he said. "Then ordinary things may be good for her." Ruthie looked up. "Can I help again tomorrow?" Miriam's hand stilled. Tomorrow. It was such a small word. It had no business sounding like a promise. Before she could answer, the back door opened and Mr. Harlan Pike stepped in without knocking. He owned the hotel building, the washhouse, the livery stable, and 3 narrow houses near the creek. He was a broad man with silver sideburns and a vest too fine for dusty streets. His smile always looked polished, but his eyes never warmed. "Miriam," he said, removing his hat as if courtesy alone made him decent. "Mrs. Dobbins tells me you have taken in boarders." Jonah set the buckets down slowly. Miriam dried her hands on her apron. "I have hired help." Pike glanced at Jonah's patched coat. "Is that what we are calling it?" Jonah stepped forward. "Sir, if there is a fee." Miriam turned on him. "I told you once not to speak for me here." Jonah stopped. Pike's mouth twitched. "A spirited arrangement, then." "There is no arrangement," Miriam said. "There is laundry work. I pay rent. The work is being done." Pike looked around the washhouse with slow, measuring eyes. They rested on Ruthie. The child slipped down from the stool and moved behind Miriam's skirt. "I do not object to charity," Pike said, "in proper places, but this hotel keeps a respectable name. Travelers notice things. Families notice things." "Families should notice a hungry child being fed," Miriam replied. His smile thinned. "Careful, Mrs. Vale. I have been patient about late repairs and modest rent." "My rent is paid through Saturday." "Yes, through Saturday." Pike tapped his hat against his palm. "After that, I may need to reconsider whether this little business suits the hotel's standing." The room seemed to shrink around the steam. Miriam felt Jonah look at her. She knew what he was thinking. She knew he would pack his few things and carry Ruthie out before letting Miriam lose her livelihood because of them. She also knew that if he did, Ruthie would remember another door closing. "What exactly are you asking?" Miriam said. Pike tilted his head. "I am asking that Mr. Mercer find lodging elsewhere, today." Ruthie's fingers tightened in Miriam's apron. Jonah's face changed. The shame was there first, then the old habit of leaving before he became someone else's burden. "I can go," he said quietly. Ruthie made a small sound, not a cry, worse, a breath pulled sharp through fear. Miriam placed one hand over the child's fingers. "No," she said. Pike blinked. "No. No." "Miriam," Jonah warned softly. She did not look at him. "Mr. Mercer is working for me. His daughter is under my care while he works. If you put them out today, then you put me out too, because I will not keep washing sheets for rooms that have more mercy than the man collecting rent on them." Pike's cheeks darkened. "Pride is expensive." "So is cowardice," Miriam said, though her voice trembled after the words left her. For a long moment, only the kettle spoke. Pike stepped closer. "You have until Saturday evening. Decide whether you want your business or your scandal." He put his hat on and left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded more dangerous than a slam. Ruthie began to shake. Jonah crouched in front of her at once. "Dove, look at me." She looked, but tears had filled her eyes. "We have to go." Jonah swallowed. Miriam knelt beside them both. The floor was damp beneath her knees. Her hands smelled of lye. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell the child that no one could take warmth away once it had been given. But she had learned too much from life to lie that beautifully. "I do not know yet," Miriam said, "but you will not be pushed into the street today." Ruthie leaned into Jonah, hiding her face. He held her close, but his eyes were on Miriam. "I cannot let you lose everything," he said. "You cannot stop me from choosing what kind of woman I mean to be." "That is not fair." "No," she said softly, "very little has been." He looked away. The rest of the day moved slower than any Miriam could remember. Work still had to be done. Shirts did not care about reputation. Sheets did not care about rent. Water still needed hauling, starch needed mixing, and collars needed ironing flat. Yet every task now carried Saturday inside it. By afternoon, clouds gathered over the western peaks. The air grew heavy with coming rain. Miriam sent Jonah to deliver clean laundry to the barber and the schoolmaster while she took Ruthie to the small mercantile for cornmeal. She knew it was a mistake the moment she stepped onto Main Street. Two women stopped speaking near the post office. A man outside the assay office looked from Ruthie to Miriam, then away. Mrs. Albright, the banker's wife, crossed the street with her daughter instead of passing them on the boardwalk. Ruthie noticed. Children always noticed what adults thought they hid. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. Miriam stopped beside the mercantile steps. "No." "Then why do they look?" Miriam looked down at the little girl's pale face and wished childhood did not require explanations for adult cruelty. Because some people are frightened by kindness when it does not follow their rules. Ruthie frowned. "That is silly." "It often is." Inside the mercantile, Mr. Crenshaw wrapped the cornmeal in brown paper and added 2 peppermint sticks without charging. He slid them across the counter toward Ruthie. "For folding handkerchiefs," he said. Ruthie looked at Miriam for permission. Miriam nodded. The child took 1 peppermint, then held the other out. "For Papa." Mr. Crenshaw's face softened. "That is a fine heart you have there." On the walk back, rain began to fall in large, warm drops. Miriam hurried Ruthie toward the alley, holding the paper parcel under her shawl. They found Jonah behind the washhouse, standing beneath the broken edge of the drying shed roof. Water dripped through the split boards in steady lines. One whole section had sagged lower during the day. If it gave way, the laundry tubs would be ruined, the firewood soaked, and Miriam's work made nearly impossible. Jonah looked at the roof, then at Miriam. "I can mend it," he said. "With what lumber?" He hesitated. Miriam understood before he answered. "No. I have a few dollars from unloading freight last night before I found the stage," he said. "Enough for boards, maybe nails." "That money is for Ruthie. She needs a roof too." Miriam wanted to argue, but rain ran down through the broken shed and splashed into the clean, empty tubs below. Jonah stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me do this much." There was something in the way he said it that stopped her. He was not only asking to fix a roof. He was asking for the right to be useful, to stand somewhere without shame, to prove that his arrival did not only bring trouble. Miriam nodded once. By dusk, Jonah was on the shed roof in the rain, hammering boards into place while thunder rolled over the mountains. Miriam stood below with a lantern, holding nails in the pocket of her apron. Ruthie watched from the doorway wrapped in the blue-brown quilt. The rain soaked Jonah's shirt and ran from the brim of his hat. Twice his boots slipped on the wet boards, and twice Miriam's heart lurched hard enough to hurt. "Come down," she called. "It can wait." "One more board." "You said that 3 boards ago." "This one means it." Despite herself, Miriam smiled. He looked down at the exact wrong moment and saw it. For a breath, the rain and thunder faded. He looked at her as if that smile had warmed some cold room in him he had long ago locked. Then the old board beneath his left foot cracked. Jonah dropped hard to one knee, catching the roof edge with both hands. Ruthie screamed from the doorway. Miriam dropped the lantern nails and ran beneath him. "Jonah!" He held still, rain pouring over his face. "I am all right." "You are a fool." "Yes," he said, breathless, "but the roof is mended." That should not have made her laugh. It did. The laugh came out shaken and half-broken, but real. Jonah looked down at her, his wet hair clinging to his forehead, and for one brief moment the years between them did not disappear, but they softened. Then Ruthie ran through the rain and wrapped both arms around Miriam's waist. Miriam looked down in surprise. The little girl was trembling, but she was not reaching for Jonah this time. She was holding Miriam. Behind them, the lamp in the washhouse window burned steady against the storm. And Miriam, with rain on her face and a frightened child in her arms, felt the first quiet pull of a truth she was not ready to name. Saturday was coming, but so was something else. Saturday arrived with a sky as clean and blue as polished glass. It was the kind of morning that made trouble seem almost indecent. Sunlight struck the wet boards of the repaired drying shed. Drops from the night rain shone along the laundry lines like tiny beads of silver. The mountains stood sharp beyond town, their dark pine slopes washed clear by the storm. Miriam woke before dawn, but Jonah was already awake. She found him outside behind the washhouse, splitting kindling beside the woodpile. His coat was hung over the fence rail. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and steam rose faintly from his shirt in the cold morning air. He worked quietly, careful not to wake Ruthie, who still slept curled on the cot with the quilt up to her chin. For a while, Miriam stood in the doorway and watched him. There had been a time when seeing Jonah in morning light would have filled her with uncomplicated joy. Back then, she had believed life would bend kindly if two people loved each other honestly enough. She had believed distance could be survived by letters. She had believed mothers told the truth because daughters needed it. Now she knew better. Love did not spare people from hunger, debt, shame, illness, or years of silence. Love could be tangled with mistakes. It could arrive late. It could stand in a yard splitting wood while a woman wondered whether opening one door might cost her the only roof she had left. Jonah set the axe down when he noticed her. "I did not mean to wake you." "You did not." He looked toward the hotel building. "Today is Saturday." "I know what day it is. I spoke with Mr. Fenner at the livery last night." Miriam's chest tightened. "About the shed?" "About work." Jonah wiped his hands on his trousers. "He will let me clean stalls and mend harness for a corner of the loft. Ruthie can sleep there if I spread enough blankets." Miriam stared at him. "You went looking for a place behind my back." "I went looking for a way to keep you from being thrown out." "That is not your choice to make." "No," he said quietly, "but neither is it fair to let you pay for my trouble." The words struck harder because they were not selfish. Jonah was not trying to leave because he wanted the road. He was trying to leave because he believed his presence had become a weight around Miriam's neck. She stepped into the yard. "Did you ask Ruthie whether she wants to sleep in a livery loft?" His face tightened. "Do not use her fear against me." "Then do not use your shame against her." Jonah looked away. The axe handle rested against the chopping block between them. Morning light touched the scar at the edge of his jaw, a small pale mark she did not remember from youth. She wondered what year had put it there. She wondered how many things had happened to him while she was learning to live beside Edwin, while her mother's letter lay hidden in his coat, while both of them were becoming people the other would barely recognize. "I cannot promise this will end well," Miriam said. "I know. I cannot promise Pike will not put me out. I know. I cannot promise I am ready to forgive you." Jonah looked back at her then. "I know that too." His answer was too gentle. It gave her nothing to fight. Inside, Ruthie stirred on the cot. They both turned toward the sound. The little girl sat up slowly, hair falling loose around her face. For one peaceful second, she looked like any child waking in a warm room. Then her eyes searched the floor, the door, the stove, the corners. "Papa." "I am here, Dove," Jonah called. Her shoulders softened at once. Miriam went inside and warmed yesterday's coffee while Jonah carried in the kindling. Ruthie accepted a tin cup of milk and a piece of cornbread. She ate near the window, where the lamp had been blown out but still stood on the sill. "Does the light come back tonight?" Ruthie asked. Miriam looked at the lamp. "It usually does." "Why?" I started leaving it there after my husband died, Miriam said before she could think better of it. Ruthie held the cup with both hands, so he could see. Jonah looked at Miriam. Miriam's throat tightened. Edwin had not needed a lamp. He had been in the ground before the first frost after fever took him. But for months after his death, Miriam had lit that window because she could not bear the thought of the washhouse going dark with only her inside it. At first, she said carefully, I think I left it burning because I did not want the room to feel empty. Ruthie studied the lamp with solemn importance. It worked. Miriam almost smiled. Did it? The child nodded. I saw it from the stage. Jonah's hand stilled around his coffee cup. Ruthie continued, unaware of what her words had done. I was scared. Then I saw the little light behind the hotel. I asked Papa if somebody lived there. He said yes. Then he got quiet. Miriam looked at Jonah. He did not meet her eyes. So that had been the moment. Not the job at the mill, not simple accident. He had seen her lamp in the window before he saw her face. Perhaps some part of him had known where to look. Perhaps the road had brought him to Silver Creek, but the light had brought him to her door. The thought unsettled her. Before anyone could speak, a knock sounded at the outer door. All three of them went still. Miriam crossed the room and opened it. Mrs. Dobbin stood there with 2 baskets of hotel towels at her feet, and a face arranged into reluctant civility. Mr. Pike will be here at 6, she said. Miriam lifted one basket. Then I have until 6. Mrs. Dobbins did not move away. Her eyes flicked toward Jonah, then Ruthie. He is not a man who enjoys being defied. Most men are not. The hotel keeper pressed her lips together. For a moment, Miriam expected another cutting remark. Instead, Mrs. Dobbins looked down at her gloved hands. My sister was turned out with 2 children in Denver, she said abruptly. Her husband drank through wages and left her. The landlady said she was protecting the house's good name. Miriam softened a little. What happened to your sister? She washed dishes until her hands cracked open, then married a grocer she did not love because winter was coming. Mrs. Dobbins swallowed. I tell myself respectable rules keep women safe. Some days I know better. Jonah said nothing. Ruthie watched from behind the cot. Mrs. Dobbins lifted her chin as if embarrassed by her own mercy. The church ladies are making noise, but Mrs. Albright needs her lace curtains cleaned by Tuesday. The banker's wife will tolerate nearly anything for clean lace. If those curtains are done well, half the respectable women in town will remember they require laundry more than judgment. Miriam blinked. Are you bringing me work or advice? Both. Mrs. Dobbins nudged the baskets with her boot. And there is a ham bone in the kitchen scraps barrel. It still has meat enough for soup. Take it before Hollis finds it. Then she turned and walked back toward the hotel without waiting to be thanked. Miriam stood in the doorway, strangely moved. Jonah came beside her and picked up both baskets. Seems you have one more ally than you thought. Mrs. Dobbins would fain to hear herself called an ally. That may be why it is true. The morning passed under pressure. Miriam washed the lace curtains by hand in water barely warm enough to loosen the dirt without weakening the threads. Ruthie sat at the table and separated wooden clothespins into neat piles, pretending the smaller ones were children and the larger ones were horses. Jonah cleaned the yard, repaired a cracked washtub, and carried the hotel towels through rinse water until his arms must have ached. They all worked like people trying to outrun a clock. At noon, Miriam made soup from the ham bone, onions, and cornmeal dumplings. Ruthie ate 2 bowls. Jonah ate only after Miriam filled his bowl and set it in front of him with a look that dared him to refuse. For a while, the washhouse felt almost ordinary. Steam clouded the window. The repaired roof held. Ruthie hummed softly to herself while drying spoons. Jonah sat near the door, spoon in hand, watching his daughter with the fragile wonder of a man seeing a small miracle and fearing it might vanish if noticed too openly. Miriam carried her own bowl to the table. "Ruthie," she said, "what is your wooden horse's name?" The child looked down at the cracked toy. "Blue." Miriam tilted her head. "He is brown." "I wanted him blue." "That is reason enough." Jonah's face changed. Her mother carved it. Ruthie's spoon paused. Miriam stayed quiet, allowing the words to settle. Jonah reached over and touched the toy with one finger. She was good with small things: wood animals, bone buttons, little flowers made from scrap cloth. Ruthie looked at him. "Mama made blue." "Yes." The child's forehead wrinkled. "I forgot." Pain moved through Jonah's eyes. "You were very little." "Was she nice?" Miriam's heart tightened. Jonah took a slow breath. She tried to be. It was not the answer most fathers would give, not the simple polished answer, but it carried a sorrow Miriam recognized. The mother had not been cruel in Jonah's telling, yet she had left. That made truth difficult. A child needed softness. A father owed honesty. Between those two things, a heart could tear. Ruthie accepted this with the quiet seriousness children sometimes showed when adults finally trusted them with part of the truth. "Did she like lamps?" Ruthie asked. Jonah's mouth trembled slightly. "She liked morning better." "Oh," Ruthie turned the wooden horse in her hands. "I like the lamp." Miriam looked down into her soup. By late afternoon, the lace curtains hung on the indoor line, clean and perfect. Mrs. Dobbins came to inspect them. She touched the delicate edge, nodded once, and said, "Mrs. Albright will have no complaint unless she invents one." Then she handed Miriam 3 coins. Miriam frowned. "She has not paid yet." "That is from the hotel kitchen, for extra towels." There were no extra towels. Mrs. Dobbins' face hardened into its usual shape. "Then perhaps I miscounted." Miriam understood. Pride wore many disguises in Silver Creek. "Thank you," she said softly. The woman sniffed and left. Miriam placed the coins in the small tin box beneath the folding table. They were not enough to change Pike's mind if he meant to be cruel, but they were enough to keep flour and lamp oil in the room. Some days, survival arrived as 3 coins and a woman pretending she had miscounted towels. The sun lowered. Every sound became too clear: boots on the boardwalk, wheels in the street, the church bell striking 5, Ruthie's soft breathing as she fell asleep in the corner chair from the long day's work. Jonah stood beside the door with his hat in his hands. "I should take her to the livery before Pike comes," he said. Miriam folded one of Edwin's old blankets with unnecessary care. "Do you want to leave?" "No." The answer came so quickly that both of them fell silent. Jonah looked at Ruthie, then back at Miriam. "No," he said again, lower, "but wanting has never been enough." Miriam thought of Edwin, a good man, a steady man, a man who had never made her heart race but had never lied to her either. She had honored him the best she could. She had held his hand when fever burned the life from him. She had mourned him honestly. But mourning did not mean burying herself beside him. Her mother had wanted safety for her. Edwin had given her safety for a time. Yet here, in this humble room behind a hotel, Miriam was beginning to understand that safety without choice was only another kind of fear. At 6 o'clock, Harlan Pike arrived. He did not knock this time either. He stepped into the washhouse wearing a black coat and a stiff collar. Behind him stood Mrs. Albright, the banker's wife, with her lace gloves folded over one wrist. Mrs. Dobbins hovered behind them, face tense. Mr. Crenshaw from the Mercantile had appeared in the alley as well, pretending to adjust a crate near the back fence. Pike looked at Jonah first, then at Ruthie asleep in the chair, then at Miriam. "Well," he said. Miriam wiped her hands on her apron. The laundry is finished. Rent is paid through today. I have the next week's rent ready. She took the coins from the tin box and placed them on the table. Pike did not look at the money. That was not the question. It is the only question written in our agreement. His smile cooled. Agreements can end. Mrs. Albright stepped forward before he could continue. Her eyes were fixed on the clean lace curtains. She touched one with a gloved hand. These are very fine, Mrs. Vale. Thank you. I have tried 3 laundresses since coming here. None could do lace without ruining it. Miriam said nothing, uncertain where this was going. Mrs. Albright looked at Pike. My husband's bank sends visitors to this hotel. I prefer our rooms to have proper curtains. Pike's jaw tightened. Of course. And I prefer not to explain why the best laundry woman in Silver Creek was pushed out over a child. Ruthie woke at the word child. Her eyes opened wide. Jonah moved instantly to her side. Mrs. Albright saw the movement. Something softened in her carefully powdered face. My first son had a cough like that when we came west, she said quietly. He was frightened of every new room, too. Pike looked cornered now, but not defeated. Ladies, you mistake business for sentiment. No, Mrs. Dobbins said from behind him, surprising everyone. We mistake cruelty for respectability too often. That is all. Mr. Crenshaw coughed into his hand, hiding a smile. Pike's face reddened. He scooped up the rent coins from the table. 1 week, he said, but the arrangement remains under review. Miriam met his eyes. So does my willingness to keep washing hotel sheets. For a moment, she feared she had gone too far. Then Mrs. Albright gave a small, approving hum. Pike turned and left without another word. The room exhaled. Ruthie slid from the chair and ran to Jonah. He knelt and gathered her close, murmuring comfort into her hair. Mrs. Albright adjusted her gloves. Send the curtains tomorrow morning, Mrs. Vale, and put starch in my husband's collars. He deserves discomfort. Then she left. Mrs. Dobbins looked at Miriam as if she wanted to say something kind but could not bear the indignity. At last, she pointed toward the stove. That soup will scorch if you keep staring at the door. Then she left too. Mr. Crenshaw lifted his crate and winked at Ruthie through the open doorway before disappearing down the alley. For several seconds, Miriam did not move. Her legs felt weak. Her hands shook. She had kept her room for 1 more week, but the cost of defiance still trembled through her bones. Jonah stood with Ruthie in his arms. You fought like a mountain lion. I feel like a wet dishcloth. That too. She laughed, but tears came with it. Jonah's smile faded. He set Ruthie down gently. The child, sensing something grown and tender, took her wooden horse and went to sit near the lamp. Jonah crossed the room until he stood close enough that Miriam could see the rain-dark flecks in his eyes. I need to tell you the rest, he said. Miriam knew he meant Ruthie's mother, the years away, the road that had made him so afraid of needing anyone. Tonight, she asked, if I wait for life to become peaceful, I may never speak. That was true enough to hurt. Miriam nodded. They sat outside under the repaired shed roof after Ruthie fell asleep again. The evening air smelled of wet wood and coal smoke. A few stars showed above the alley. The lamp in the window cast a square of gold onto the damp ground between their boots. Jonah held his hat between his knees. Her name was Eliza, he said. I met her in a boarding house kitchen near Leadville. She was gentle when sober and frightened when not. She had no people. I thought giving her a name and a room would steady her. Miriam listened without judgment. She loved Ruthie in bright moments, Jonah continued. There were days she sang to her and carved toys and made little cakes from nothing. Then there were days the sadness took her so far away that Ruthie might as well have been calling across a river. Did she die? Miriam asked softly. No, his voice broke around the word. She left in January, said the walls were closing in, said a child deserved better than a mother who could not stay whole. She kissed Ruthie while she slept and walked out before dawn. Miriam closed her eyes. Jonah rubbed both hands over his face. I went after her as far as I could. Then Ruthie took fever. I had to choose. You chose your daughter. I chose too late to save her from knowing what being left feels like. Miriam looked through the window at the sleeping child. In Ruthie's fear, she suddenly saw more than hunger. She saw every doorway the child had watched. Every morning she had woken asking whether love had left again. Jonah's voice lowered. That is why I almost left today. I keep thinking if I move first, nobody can turn us out. But Ruthie does not need more roads. She needs one place to trust. Miriam looked at him then. And you? He gave a tired smile that did not reach his eyes. I have forgotten how to need anything for myself. The answer settled deep inside her. For years, Miriam had believed she was the one who had been left. That pain was real. It would not vanish because she now understood more of the story. But beside her sat a man who had been left too, in ways that did not make him innocent of the past but made him human. She reached into her apron pocket and drew out the letter he had shown her the night before. He had given it to her after supper, saying she could read it when ready. I read it this afternoon, she said. Jonah went very still. Miriam looked down at the folded paper. My mother was afraid. She thought poverty would swallow me if I waited for you. She thought Edwin would keep me safe. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was only dying and desperate. Jonah's voice was barely audible. Do you hate her? Miriam watched the lamp glow through the window. I do not know how to hate a woman who was trying to save me, she said, but I grieve what her saving cost. Jonah nodded slowly. Miriam folded the letter again. I grieve it more tonight than I did yesterday. Why? She looked at him, and for once she did not hide the truth quickly enough. Because yesterday I thought the life we lost was only a young girl's foolish dream, she said. Now I have seen enough to wonder what kind of man you became. Jonah's breath caught. Neither of them moved. Inside the washhouse, Ruthie turned in her sleep and murmured something too soft to understand. Miriam rose first because staying seated beside him suddenly felt like standing too close to a fire. I should check the stove. Jonah stood as well. Miriam. She paused at the door. I cannot ask you for anything. No, she said gently, you cannot. I know. But you can stop preparing to vanish every time life grows hard. The words struck him plainly. Miriam opened the door. Warm lamplight spilled over her dress, faded black from years of work and steam. For tonight, she said, bolt the door. Jonah looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Inside, Ruthie slept beneath the old quilt with the wooden horse tucked under one arm. The room was poor, crowded, and uncertain. Pike might still turn on them. The town might still talk. Old grief might rise again by morning. But when Jonah slid the bolt into place, the sound did not feel like a trap. It felt like a beginning trying to become brave. On Sunday morning, Miriam did not go to church. She told herself it was because the washhouse needed tending. The hotel towels had to be boiled, Mrs. Albright's curtains had to be wrapped, and the stove flue had begun drawing poorly after the storm. All of that was true. But it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Miriam could not bear to sit in a pew, while half of Silver Creek pretended not to look at her. She had faced Pike. She had held her voice steady before Mrs. Dobbins and Mrs. Albright. She had opened her door and kept it open. But courage, she was learning, was not a well that filled itself overnight. By morning, hers felt nearly dry. The church bell rang across town at 9. Its sound floated through the washhouse window while Jonah mended a torn harness strap at the table. Ruthie sat on the floor near his boots, arranging clothespins in a careful little fence around her wooden horse. Miriam stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal and listening to the bell call decent families into public light. Jonah looked up after the third ringing. "Do you usually go?" "Usually. Because of us." She did not turn. "Because of me." He let the answer rest, but she felt him hear more than she had said. Ruthie lifted Blue over the clothespin fence and whispered, "He is going to church." Miriam glanced down. "Is he?" Ruthie nodded solemnly, "But he sits in the back because he kicks." That brought a quiet laugh from Jonah, and the sound changed the room. It surprised Miriam every time, not because laughter seemed impossible for him, but because when it came, it revealed the man under the dust and fear. The young Jonah had laughed easily. This older Jonah laughed carefully, as though joy had become a dish he did not want to drop. Miriam set bowls on the table. "Then Blue may sit beside me next Sunday." Ruthie looked up quickly. "We can go." The question was so full of hope that Miriam wished she had said nothing. Jonah's hand stilled over the harness strap. "Ruthie." Miriam placed a bowl in front of the child. "We will see." Ruthie accepted that answer. Children who had known too much uncertainty often became skilled at living on small promises. After breakfast, Jonah took the wrapped lace curtains to the Albright house. Ruthie wanted to go with him, but Miriam kept her behind. "Your papa will be back soon," Miriam said. The little girl stood near the window, watching Jonah cross the yard into the alley. "How soon?" "Before the oatmeal pot dries, if he walks proper." "What if he does?" "Then I will scold him until he wishes he had." Ruthie considered this. "You scold nice." "That may be the strangest compliment I have ever received." Ruthie's mouth twitched. Then she climbed onto the stool beside the folding table and touched the edge of the old quilt. "Who made this?" "Edwin's mother." "Was Edwin your papa?" "No, he was my husband." Ruthie looked puzzled. "Where is he?" Miriam had expected the question someday, but not while Sunday sunlight lay so gently across the floor. "He died." The child's face changed in immediate serious sympathy. "Did he leave before breakfast?" "No, sweetheart, not that kind of gone." Ruthie touched Blue's cracked wooden back. "Like Mama." Miriam sat slowly in the chair across from her. She did not know how much Jonah had told Ruthie, or how much Ruthie understood. Children sometimes carried truth in pieces. A mother who walked away could feel just as vanished as one beneath earth. Maybe worse, because a living absence kept asking questions. "I do not know your mama's story," Miriam said carefully. "Not all of it." "Papa says she had sad storms." Miriam's heart softened. "That sounds like something your papa would say." Ruthie nodded. "He says when people have storms, you stand back so lightning doesn't hurt you." "And what do you think?" The little girl's brow tightened with effort. "I think maybe if you stand too far, they can't find you after." Miriam had no answer. Outside, a wagon rolled past. Sunlight caught dust in the window. Somewhere the church congregation began singing, their voices faint and far away. Ruthie looked at Miriam with sudden worry. "Do you have storms?" Miriam thought of Edwin's fever, her mother's letter, Jonah stepping from the stage with a child in his arms, the lonely lamp in the window. "Yes," she said, "sometimes." Ruthie slid from her stool and came around the table. She stood beside Miriam's chair, uncertain, then placed one small hand on Miriam's sleeve. "I can sit close," she whispered, "not too close for lightning." Miriam had to turn her face toward the window. When Jonah returned, he found Ruthie helping Miriam sort buttons from an old tin. He stopped in the doorway as though the sight had caught him unprepared. She is learning which ones match, Miriam said, voice steady again. Ruthie held up 2 brown buttons. These are cousins. Jonah removed his hat. They look it. Miriam saw the envelope in his hand. What is that? She asked. Mrs. Albright paid for the curtains. Already. Jonah laid the money on the table. It was more than Miriam expected, far more. She said there are 3 more houses asking after lace, he said, and a boarding house near the depot may send sheets if you can promise a 2-day return. Miriam stared at the coins. For months she had lived 1 week at a time. Rent, flour, soap, lamp oil, thread. Always a thin line. Always one sickness, one broken tub, one slow week away from failure. Now the money lay shining on the table, not enough to save everything, but enough to give the future a small handle. Jonah smiled faintly. You look suspicious. I am. Of good news. Especially of that. His smile deepened, and for a moment it warmed the room more than the stove. Then another knock came. This one was softer than Pike's, more hesitant. Miriam opened the door and found a woman standing outside with a boy of about 8 beside her. The woman was thin, with tired cheeks and a brown shawl pulled tight over her shoulders. Miriam recognized her from church but could not recall her name. Mrs. Vale, the woman said, I am Ada Whitcomb. My son Matthew had the fever last month. Mrs. Dobbins said you might have a spare shirt needing mending or laundry work I could help with. Miriam looked past her. 2 more women stood near the alley gate. One held a baby. The other clutched a bundle of clothes. Ada flushed. Not charity, I can work. My husband has been laid off from the spur line. Miriam looked back at the small room. It was already crowded with her, Jonah, Ruthie, tubs, lines, a cot, and more work than any one person could finish. Then she looked at Ada's hands. They were cracked worse than her own. Miriam understood that kind of pride. It stood in doorways asking for work when what it needed was mercy. I have towels to wring, Miriam said, and collars to starch. Ada's eyes filled so quickly that she looked away. Thank you. By afternoon, the washhouse had become something Miriam had never intended. Ada wrung towels beside the rinse tub. Mrs. Kessler, whose husband drove freight, brought her baby and sat near the door sewing torn seams for pennies. A young girl from the north end of town sorted socks while Ruthie supervised with solemn importance, placing blue on the table to watch quality, as Jonah called it. The room filled with steam, women's voices, babies fussing, and the slap of wet cloth against boards. Miriam should have felt crowded. Instead, she felt something else. The loneliness of the washhouse began to loosen its grip. Jonah kept to the yard, hauling water, chopping wood, and stringing a second line between 2 posts. He did not intrude on the women's talk, but more than once Miriam caught him glancing through the open door with quiet wonder. Near 3 o'clock, rain threatened again. Dark clouds gathered beyond the western ridge, and the air smelled sharp and metallic. Jonah began moving the nearly dry sheets under the shed. Matthew Whitcomb ran out to help him, thin legs flashing beneath patched trousers. Ruthie stood at the doorway, watching the boy. You can go, Miriam said. Ruthie shook her head. Matthew is kind. I know. Then why stay here? Ruthie looked up at Miriam. If I go outside, will you still be here when I come back? Miriam knelt in front of her. The washhouse noise moved around them, but for Miriam the whole world narrowed to the child's solemn face. Yes, she said, I will still be here. Ruthie searched her eyes with painful seriousness. You promise this one. Miriam remembered what she had told herself about promises. They were living things. They had to be fed with action, not sweetness. I promise, she said. Ruthie held still a moment longer. Then she ran into the yard. She did not run far, only to the edge of the shed, where Matthew showed her how to toss clothespins into an empty bucket. But when she looked back and saw Miriam in the doorway, her face brightened. Jonah saw it too. Their eyes met across the yard. Something quiet passed between them, not romance exactly, not yet, something deeper and more frightening, recognition, the kind that said they were no longer only remembering what they had lost. They were beginning to see what stood in front of them. The storm arrived before supper, not fierce but steady. Rain tapped the roof and ran in clean lines from the repaired boards. For once, the tub stayed dry beneath the shed. Jonah stood under the eaves watching the water fall where it was supposed to fall. Miriam came beside him with 2 tin cups of coffee. "You are admiring your roof like it is a newborn calf," she said. "It is better behaved than some calves." She handed him a cup, their fingers brushed, neither moved away quickly. Inside, Ruthie laughed at something Matthew had said. The sound rose bright over the rain. Jonah looked toward the open door. I had forgotten she could sound like that. How old was she when her mother left? 4, his gaze remained on Ruthie. Old enough to know, too young to understand. "And you?" He smiled sadly. Old enough to understand, too foolish to know how to heal it. Miriam leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "You are doing better than you think." "No, I am doing better because I am not doing it alone." The words settled between them, warm and dangerous. Miriam looked out at the rain. "Do not make this into something simple, Jonah." "I would not dare." "I mean it." "So do I." She turned toward him then. "We are not young by the creek anymore." "No. I had a husband, you had a wife." "Yes." "You have a child whose heart is still bruised." "I know. And I have spent years keeping myself standing because sitting down felt too much like giving up." Jonah's eyes softened. "Miriam." She looked away before tenderness could undo her. "I do not know what I am ready for." "I am not asking." "Good. But I am here." Her throat tightened. Rain blurred the alley beyond them. The world smelled of clean boards, soap, wet dust, and coffee. Inside, the women gathered their earnings and thanked Miriam with tired, grateful voices. One by one, they left through the rain, holding shawls over their heads, carrying small coins and a little dignity back into their homes. Ada Whitcomb paused last at the door. "I have not heard this room sound alive before," she said. Miriam looked around. The cot was rumpled, the floor was damp, buttons lay in a dish, 2 towels still needed folding. Ruthie had fallen asleep in the chair with blue tucked beneath her chin. Alive. Yes. That was the word for it. After Ada left, Jonah carried Ruthie to the cot. The child stirred just enough to reach for Miriam's hand. Miriam gave it, and Ruthie held on even in sleep. Jonah tucked the quilt around his daughter, then stepped back. For a long while, he and Miriam stood over the sleeping child in silence. At last Jonah spoke. "I found work at the mill." Miriam looked at him quickly. "They need men to clear jammed timber from the flume. Hard work, but steady for 2 weeks if I show up before dawn." "That is good." "Yes." But something in his voice made her wait. He rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. "It is 12 miles up the canyon. I would leave before light and come back near dark." Ruthie's fingers tightened around Miriam's hand, as though she had heard in her sleep. Miriam understood the question Jonah had not asked. Could Ruthie stay? Could Miriam become, even for long days, the person who remained? She looked at the child, then at the lamp in the window, then at Jonah, whose whole face carried fear of needing too much. "Yes," she said quietly. Jonah closed his eyes. "I will pay you," he said. "You will bring back wages, and keep this roof from falling on my head again. That roof will outlive us all. Then you will fix something else." A faint smile touched his mouth, but his eyes shone. He looked down at Ruthie. "She may cry when I leave. Then I will sit with her. She may be angry. Then I will let her be angry. She may ask for things I cannot answer." Miriam's voice softened. "Then I will tell her the truth I know and not pretend to know the rest." Jonah looked at her, as if she had given him more than shelter. Outside, thunder moved far down the valley, already leaving Silver Creek behind. The storm was passing. But before dawn, another kind of test would begin. Jonah left before the sky had decided whether it wanted to be morning. The washhouse was still blue with darkness when Miriam woke to the sound of him folding his blanket. He moved carefully, but the room was too small for quiet to hide him. The stove held only a red memory of last night's fire. Rainwater dripped from the eaves outside in slow, patient taps. Ruthie slept on the cot with one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Jonah knelt beside her for a long time. Miriam stayed still on her narrow pallet near the back wall, not wanting to steal that moment from him. Through half-closed eyes, she watched him brush a loose strand of hair from Ruthie's face. The child stirred but did not wake. "I will come back," Jonah whispered. He said it softly, but the words reached Miriam like a prayer. Then he rose, took his hat, lifted the lunch bundle Miriam had wrapped the night before, and crossed to the door. Miriam sat up. "Jonah." He turned. In the dim room, his face looked drawn with worry. "I hoped not to wake you." "You did not." She pulled her shawl around her shoulders. "The coffee is in the small tin. There is bread in the cloth. You already gave me enough." "No, I packed what a man clearing timber should eat, not what a man ashamed of hunger would accept." His mouth softened. "You have grown sharper." "I have grown tired of men pretending they do not need breakfast." For a moment, they nearly smiled like ordinary people. Then Ruthie made a small sound in her sleep, and the softness vanished from Jonah's face. Miriam stood. "Go before she wakes and makes it harder." "That feels cruel." "Coming back will answer it." He looked at her and she knew he heard the old wound beneath the present instruction. Coming back. Such a simple act, such a heavy history. "I will," he said. Miriam held his gaze. "Then do." Jonah nodded once, opened the door and stepped into the wet dark. The room seemed colder after he left. Miriam stirred the stove back to life and set water to heat. She tried to move as she always did, measuring soap, stacking towels, sweeping the damp floor near the threshold. Work had carried her through grief before. It knew how to hold a woman upright when her heart was uncertain. But every small sound seemed too loud now. A cup set down, a coal shifting, a wagon wheel somewhere far off. At last Ruthie woke. For one peaceful moment, the child blinked at the ceiling. Then her eyes moved to the pallet by the door where Jonah had slept. It was empty. She sat straight up. "Papa." Miriam set the broom aside. "He went to the mill." Ruthie's face changed so quickly it hurt to see. Fear entered first, then disbelief, then anger trying to stand in front of both. "No. He has work today." "No." Ruthie scrambled from the cot, dragging the quilt halfway to the floor. He said he would come back." Ruthie shook her head hard. "They say that." Miriam crossed the room slowly, careful not to rush her. "Your papa means it." The child backed away until her shoulders touched the table. "Mama said after breakfast." Miriam stopped. Ruthie's lower lip trembled, but her eyes were fierce. "She said after breakfast she would come back with sugared bread. She didn't. Papa says storms took her, but she had boots. She walked." There it was. The child had carried the memory plainly, not as adults softened it, not as Jonah named it with sorrow, but exactly as abandonment feels to a 5-year-old. Someone said after breakfast. Someone put on boots. Someone did not come back. Miriam knelt on the floor. "You are angry." Ruthie's small hands curled into fists. "No." "You can be." "No." "Yes," Miriam said gently. "You can be angry and still be loved." The little girl stared at her, as if this was a dangerous new teaching. Her face crumpled. "I don't want him to go." "I know." "I don't want the mill." "I know." "I don't want you." The words struck Miriam in the chest, but she did not flinch. Ruthie gasped after saying them, as if she had frightened herself. Miriam stayed where she was. "That is allowed too." Ruthie's tears spilled over. "I want Papa." "I know, sweetheart." "Don't call me that." "All right." The child stood shaking, her hair loose, the quilt pooled around her feet. Miriam wanted to pull her close. Instead, she remained still, because Ruthie's fear needed room to kick before it could rest. After a long moment, Miriam reached for the cracked wooden horse on the cot and set it between them on the floor. "Blue can wait with you," she said. Ruthie looked at the toy, then away. "I hate Blue." "That is allowed." "I hate this room." "That is allowed too." "I hate you." Miriam swallowed the ache. "That is the biggest feeling of all. We can set it on the table until it grows smaller." Ruthie stared at her through tears. "What?" "When feelings are too large to carry," Miriam said, "sometimes I imagine setting them down somewhere safe. Mine usually go in the flour tin." The child sniffed despite herself. "Feelings don't fit in flour tins." "Not politely, but mine never had manners." Ruthie's mouth wavered, not a smile but almost. Miriam rose and took the empty flour tin from the shelf. She placed it on the table and opened the lid. "There," she said, "put the hate inside for now. We will not throw it out. We will only keep it from breaking the furniture." Ruthie stared at the tin for a long time. Then, with a small angry sob, she picked up Blue and dropped him into it. The clatter was loud. Miriam nodded solemnly. "A strong deposit." Ruthie burst into tears. This time, when Miriam opened her arms, the child came. She did not come gently. She ran into Miriam with all the force of a little body that had been holding too much. Miriam caught her and sat back on the floor, letting the child sob against her shoulder. "I want Papa," Ruthie cried again. "He will come back." "What if he falls in the river?" "Then he will climb out wet and foolish." "What if logs hurt him?" "Then he will remember. He has a daughter who scolds better than any doctor." "What if he forgets?" Miriam closed her eyes. That question belonged to both of them. "He will not forget you," she said. "Some people are late, some people are lost, but your Papa is not forgetting you." Ruthie cried until her body grew heavy. Miriam held her through all of it. She did not hush her. She did not tell her to be brave. The child had been brave long enough. The morning's work began late. Miriam burned the first pot of oatmeal. Ruthie refused the second, then ate 2 bites of bread, then asked without looking at Miriam whether Blue could come out of the flour tin. "If he is ready to behave," Miriam said. Ruthie lifted him out, wiped his wooden nose with her sleeve, and whispered something Miriam pretended not to hear. By 10, Ada Whitcomb arrived with her mending basket and Matthew beside her. She took one look at Ruthie's swollen eyes and said nothing. That was one of the reasons Miriam liked her. Ada had the grace not to make sympathy into a show. Matthew tried to interest Ruthie in a game of clothespin soldiers. Ruthie ignored him for nearly half an hour, then moved one pin 3 inches to the left and announced that his fort would fall if he kept putting the gate so close to the creek. Matthew considered this. "You know forts." I know, leaving. The boy looked confused, but he moved the gate. Miriam watched them while scrubbing shirts at the washboard. Ruthie did not laugh. She did not become easy. But she stayed. That was enough for one morning. Near noon, Mrs. Dobbins came down with a list of linens and a small bundle wrapped in newspaper. "For the child," she said briskly. Miriam opened it. Inside was a pair of stockings, mended but clean, and a faded yellow ribbon. Ruthie came closer despite herself. Mrs. Dobbins looked at the ribbon as if it had offended her. "My sister's girl left it here last year. No use letting moths raise it." Ruthie touched the ribbon with one careful finger. "Yellow," she whispered. "It appears so," Mrs. Dobbins said. Miriam hid a smile. "Would you like it in your hair?" Ruthie looked uncertain. "Does it cost?" "No." "Will she want it back?" Mrs. Dobbins' face changed. Only for a moment. Then she sniffed. "Not unless she plans to ride from Denver for half a ribbon." Ruthie accepted this as reasonable. Miriam tied the ribbon at the end of one braid. The color was soft and cheerful against the child's dark hair. Ruthie walked to the window afterward and studied her reflection in the glass. "I look like mourning," she said. Mrs. Dobbins turned away so quickly that Miriam suspected her eyes had filled. The day dragged. Miriam did more looking at the road than she meant to. Every wagon sound pulled her attention. Every man's voice in the alley made Ruthie stiffen. When the sun lowered behind the hotel roof, Ruthie's waiting became painful to watch. She moved from the cot to the window, from the window to the door, from the door to Miriam's side. She did not ask questions anymore. Silence had become her way of protecting herself from answers. By supper, Jonah had not returned. Miriam kept her voice calm while stirring beans. "The mill is far." Ruthie sat at the table with Blue in her lap. "I know. Work can run late." "I know. Roads are muddy after rain." "I know." Miriam set the spoon down. Ruthie's face had gone still in the terrible way children's faces do, when hope is trying not to be seen. Outside, dusk gathered blue in the alley. The lamp sat unlit on the windowsill. Ruthie looked at it, lighted. Miriam struck a match and touched it to the wick. The flame caught, small and gold. Ruthie climbed onto the cot beneath the window and pulled the quilt around her shoulders. She sat facing the glass, wooden horse pressed to her chest. Miriam came beside her. He saw this lamp when he came from the stage. Ruthie did not look away from the window. "Then he can see it now." "Yes. If he is coming." Miriam sat down beside her. "Yes." The town darkened. Supper voices faded. The hotel windows brightened one by one. Somewhere a fiddle started near the saloon, then stopped after a few uncertain notes. 8 o'clock passed. Then 9. Ada came by once, offering to sit with them. Miriam thanked her but declined. Ruthie had stopped speaking entirely. Her small body leaned against Miriam's side, not quite accepting comfort but no longer refusing it. At 9:30, footsteps sounded in the alley. Ruthie did not move. She had heard too many footsteps that were not the right ones. Then a voice came through the door, hoarse and tired. "Dove." Ruthie flew from the cot. Jonah opened the door just in time to catch her. She struck him hard in the chest with both little fists before clinging to him. "You said," she cried, "you said." "I know." Jonah dropped to his knees in the doorway, holding her. His face was pale beneath dirt and sawdust. One sleeve was torn. A shallow cut marked his cheek, but he was standing. He was there. "I know, Ruthie. The timber jam broke loose. We had to help pull Tom Brayer from the shallows. I came as fast as I could." "You said morning." "I said I would come back." "You left before breakfast." His eyes filled. "I did." Ruthie hit his chest again, weaker this time. Don't. I am sorry. Don't go before breakfast. Jonah pressed his face to her hair. All right. Miriam stood near the stove, one hand over her mouth. The scene before her was too tender and too painful. A father learning that providing could still wound. A child learning that coming back did not erase the fear of leaving. Love, she thought, was not proved only in grand rescues. Sometimes it was proved by kneeling in a doorway and accepting a child's anger without defending yourself. Ruthie finally looked at him. You're bleeding. It is small. She touched the cut on his cheek. You need Miss Miriam. Jonah's eyes lifted over Ruthie's head to Miriam. Miss Miriam. Not the woman he had once loved, not the widow in the washhouse, not yet the place Ruthie belonged. But needed. That word moved through Miriam like a quiet bell. She crossed the room and took the clean cloth from beside the basin. Sit down before you fall down. Jonah obeyed. Ruthie refused to leave his lap while Miriam cleaned the cut. The wound was not deep, but the skin around it had bruised. Sawdust clung to his hair. His hands were raw from rope work. You should have sent word, Miriam said. I tried. No one was riding down before dark. You should have come home slower if you were hurt. His gaze softened at the word home. Miriam realized she had said it too late to take back. Ruthie noticed too. Her grip on Jonah's shirt loosened. Home, she repeated. No one corrected her. Miriam finished tying the cloth. Her fingers lingered near Jonah's jaw for one dangerous second. He did not move. The room held still around them, lamp burning gold, supper cooling on the stove, rain-sweet air drifting through the open door. Then Jonah spoke quietly. I saw the lamp from the end of the alley. Ruthie leaned against his chest. I lit it. Miriam raised an eyebrow. I asked, Ruthie amended. Jonah kissed the top of her head. Then it worked. The child looked at Miriam. Her face was still tear-streaked. Tomorrow he eats breakfast before leaving. Miriam nodded solemnly. That seems fair. And blue comes out of the flour tin. Jonah looked confused. Why was blue in the flour tin? Ruthie rested her cheek against him. He had feelings. Jonah's mouth trembled with tired laughter. Miriam turned toward the stove before they saw the tears in her own eyes. Later, after Ruthie had eaten half a bowl of beans and fallen asleep sitting between them, Jonah carried her to the cot. This time, when he laid her down, she did not wake in panic. Her fingers held his sleeve for a moment, then released. Jonah stood over her, shaken by the small trust. Miriam came beside him. She waited all day. I know. She was angry. She should be. She was afraid you would not come back. His voice broke, so was I. Miriam looked at him. The honesty in that answer opened something between them. Not weakness, not excuse, just the truth of a man who had spent the whole day fighting a river, logs, wages, time, and his own terror of failing the child who needed him. You came back, Miriam said. Jonah nodded, eyes on Ruthie. I will keep doing it until she believes me. Miriam looked at the lamp, then at the little girl, then at Jonah's tired hands hanging at his sides. That may take time. I have time if I am allowed to spend it here. The question was quiet. Not spoken directly, but there. Miriam felt the weight of it, Pike's threat, town gossip, Edwin's memory, her mother's letter, Jonah's wife, gone somewhere into the wide world with her own storms, Ruthie's hand in hers, the lamp in the window, the washhouse alive with women who needed work, the fragile beginning that had grown in only a few days and already felt rooted in her floorboards. She could not answer everything, so she answered only the night. There is a blanket near the stove, she said, and beans if you are hungry. Jonah turned toward her. It was not a promise of forever, but it was not a dismissal. For now in Miriam's life, that was no small thing. Outside, the town settled into darkness. The lamp in the laundry window kept burning long after the hotel lights went out. Its glow touched the wet alley, the repaired shed roof, the stacked tubs, and the man sleeping near the door where he could hear his daughter breathe. And for the first time since Ruthie's mother had walked away before breakfast, the child slept through the night. The next morning, Jonah did not leave before breakfast. He woke early, because habit was harder to quiet than a rooster, but he stayed on his pallet until Ruthie opened her eyes. Miriam saw him lying still near the door, one arm bent beneath his head, staring at the ceiling as if remaining in one place required more strength than clearing timber from a flooded flume. Ruthie stirred beneath the quilt. Her first glance went to the pallet. Jonah was there. The change in her face was small, but Miriam saw it, a tiny easing around the mouth, a loosening of the hand that had slept wrapped around Blue. Trust did not come rushing back like spring floodwater. It seeped in slowly, drop by drop, softening ground that had gone hard. "Morning dove," Jonah said. Ruthie sat up, her yellow ribbon hung loose from one braid. "You didn't go." "I told you I would eat breakfast first." She studied him carefully. "Then you go." "Yes." Her lower lip tightened, but she nodded. "After oats." "After oats." Miriam turned to the stove so they would not see how deeply that little bargain moved her. Breakfast was simple: oatmeal, coffee, bread toasted on the stove lid, and a spoon of preserves thinned with hot water so it seemed like more than it was. Jonah ate what Miriam put before him without argument. Ruthie watched every bite as though making sure the agreement was honored fully. When he stood at last, Ruthie slipped from her chair. "Wait." Jonah stopped with his hat in hand. She ran to the cot, took Blue from beneath the quilt, and pressed the wooden horse into his palm. Jonah knelt. "You want me to take him? So he knows you come back too." His face tightened with the effort not to break. Miriam stepped away to rinse the bowls, giving him the mercy of not being watched too closely. Jonah curled his fingers around the toy. "I will bring him home before supper if the good Lord permits." Ruthie touched his cheek near the bandage Miriam had tied the night before. "No logs. I will do my best to avoid arguing with them." "That means no." "That means no." Only then did she let him go. He paused at the door and looked at Miriam. There were words in his eyes, but he did not spend them carelessly. He only nodded once. She nodded back. After he left, Ruthie stood at the window until his shape disappeared beyond the alley gate. "He has Blue," she said. "Yes. So he has to come back." Miriam placed one hand on the child's shoulder. "That is a strong reason." Ruthie leaned into her for 1 second, then pulled away as if remembering she had not given herself permission for such things. But she did not look ashamed. That was new too. The workday began, with more noise than usual. By 8 o'clock, Ada Whitcomb had arrived with Matthew, and Mrs. Kessler came carrying her baby and a sack of torn shirts from the miners' boarding house. 2 other women followed before noon, one with red eyes from crying and one with a laugh too loud for her tired face. Word had moved quietly through Silver Creek that Miriam Vale would pay honest pennies for honest hands. The washhouse grew crowded again, but not in the choking way. There were buckets at every corner, steam clouding every pane, wet shirts snapping against boards, and women talking while they worked because silence made hardship heavier. Ruthie sat beneath the folding table with a scrap of cloth, sewing crooked stitches under Mrs. Kessler's patient instruction. Matthew carried firewood in armfuls, proud as a hired man. Miriam moved among them like the captain of a small, steaming ship. She counted bundles, marked shirts with thread, set aside torn seams, checked water heat, and kept a careful eye on the soap supply. Her hands hurt by noon, but her heart did not feel as empty as it used to at that hour. The washhouse had become more than a place to scrub away the town's dirt. It had become a room where women could bring their need without lowering their eyes. Near midday, Mr. Crenshaw appeared at the alley gate with a wooden crate. "I have something for Mrs. Vale," he called. Miriam wiped her hands. "If it is another sack of collars, leave it and run before I throw one at you." "It is not collars." He carried the crate inside and set it near the stove. "Broken jars from the mercantile, lids missing, chips on the rims, no good for selling. Fine for buttons, soap scraps, clothespins, and whatever else women with sense make useful." Ada smiled. "You are suddenly generous, Mr. Crenshaw." He looked offended. "Nothing sudden about it. I have hidden it well for years." The women laughed. Ruthie crawled from beneath the table and peered into the crate. "Can feelings go in jars too?" Mr. Crenshaw blinked. "I suppose they may if they are small enough." "Miriam uses flour tins." "Does she now?" Miriam gave Ruthie a look. Ruthie gave one back, innocent as a church window. Mr. Crenshaw cleared his throat, eyes smiling. "Then jars may be for medium feelings, flour tins for large ones, barrels for Mondays." Even Miriam laughed at that. The sound carried through the open door into the alley, where two women walking past slowed and looked in. One of them smiled uncertainly. The other did not. Silver Creek was still deciding what to make of Miriam's little room full of need and work and laughter. Miriam had not yet decided either. By afternoon, the air warmed, and she propped the back door open with a flat iron. A breeze came in carrying the scent of pine from the hills and coal smoke from the mill. Somewhere far up the canyon, men were working the timber flume. Miriam found herself listening for sounds she could not possibly hear. Ruthie listened too. She was better today. She folded scraps, helped Mrs. Kessler rock the baby's cradle with one careful foot, and asked Ada whether Matthew's father always came home from the spur line. Ada's hand slowed only a little. "Most days." "What about not most days?" Matthew looked down at the sock he was sorting. Ada answered gently, "Then we wait with supper warm." Ruthie considered this. "Does waiting make supper cold?" "Yes," Ada said, "but it can be warmed again." Miriam looked at Ada with quiet gratitude. Some women knew how to speak to frightened children because life had taught them the language. Late in the afternoon, Pike returned. He did not enter at first. He stood in the doorway, taking in the crowded washhouse with a displeasure too controlled to be honest. The women quieted one by one. Even the baby seemed to sense the shift and stopped fussing. Miriam set down the shirt she was wringing. "Mr. Pike." His gaze moved over Ada, Mrs. Kessler, the baskets, the drying lines, the jars, the children. "You have turned my washhouse into a public charity room." "I have turned my rented washhouse into a working laundry." Crowded rooms bring accidents. Empty pockets bring worse. The red-eyed woman near the stove lowered her gaze, but Ada lifted her chin. Pike stepped inside. "I spoke with the town council this morning." Miriam's stomach tightened. "About laundry." About propriety. About safety. About whether a business operating behind a hotel should house transient men and gather half the struggling women in town under one roof. Mrs. Kessler clutched her baby closer. Ruthie slipped behind Miriam's skirt. That familiar movement, once heartbreaking, now stirred something fiercer in Miriam. "No one is housed here except those I allow," she said. "No woman is gathered here except by her own choice, and no man is transient simply because misfortune brought him to the end of his money." Pike's mouth hardened. "You speak boldly for someone with so little claim to anything." The room went dangerously still. Miriam felt those words land exactly where he intended. She owned no building, no land, no hotel, No husband stood beside her in legal protection. Even her work depended on walls another man could take away. For one terrible second, she felt small. Then Ruthie's fingers found her hand. The child was shaking, but she stayed. Miriam looked at Pike. "You are right, I have little claim." A faint satisfaction touched his face. "I have no deed to this building," Miriam continued. "I have no rich husband. I have no brother on the council. I have one stove, 4 tubs, a bad back, rent money, and a name that still appears on the agreement you signed when Edwin was alive." Pike's expression cooled. She took one step forward. "But every shirt washed in this room is clean. Every coin paid here is earned. Every woman working here leaves with more dignity than when she came. If that troubles the council, then perhaps the council should send its own laundry elsewhere and wear its pride dirty." Ada made a small sound that might have been approval. Pike looked around the room again and seemed to notice, perhaps for the first time, that Miriam was not standing alone. The women had grown still but not weak. Mrs. Kessler's tired eyes were fixed on him. Ada's cracked hands gripped a towel like a banner. Even young Matthew stood near the wood box, jaw set in imitation of courage. Pike smiled without warmth. "This is not over." It rarely is with men who enjoy hearing themselves threaten women. His face darkened. Then a voice came from the alley. "Mrs. Vale." A boy from the telegraph office stood at the gate, hat in hand. He looked uncertain, as if he had walked into a storm he could not see. Miriam's breath caught. "Yes." "Message from the Mill Road." He held out a folded slip. "For Mr. Jonah Mercer's people." Ruthie made a small frightened sound. Miriam crossed the room and took the message. Her fingers felt suddenly cold. Jonah's people. Since when had that meant her? Since when had the town begun to understand what she herself had not dared decide? She opened the paper. The words were brief, written in a rushed hand. "Flume accident. Mercer helping injured man down canyon. Delayed, child not to worry. He has the wooden horse, returning by dark if possible." Miriam closed her eyes. Relief came first, so strong it nearly weakened her knees. Then something else followed. A quiet ache at the thought of Jonah, tired and hurt from yesterday, still helping another man down the canyon. Ruthie stared up at her. "What?" Miriam knelt. "Your papa sent word." "He did?" "Yes, he is delayed because someone was hurt, but he is helping. He told us not to worry." Ruthie's eyes filled, blue. Miriam smiled through her own tight throat. "He has blue." The child let out a breath that was almost a sob. Pike watched this exchange, and for the first time that day, uncertainty moved across his face. Perhaps he had expected scandal and disorder. Instead, he had found women working, children waiting, and a father sending word so his little girl's heart would not break twice the same way. Miriam folded the message carefully and placed it on the table. Pike cleared his throat. "I will return when there is less drama." "No doubt you will bring some with you," Mrs. Dobbins said from the doorway. Everyone turned. She stood behind Pike with a hotel ledger pressed against her waist. None of them had heard her approach. Pike looked irritated. "This is not your concern." "The hotel laundry is my concern," she said. "And you will be interested to know that 3 guests asked this morning why their shirts look better than they have since leaving Denver. One said he chose to stay another week because his linens came back proper." Pike adjusted his cuff. "Good service is expected." "Then stop threatening the woman providing it." A faint gasp moved through the room. Mrs. Dobbins ignored it. She opened the ledger. "Also, Mrs. Albright has recommended Mrs. Vale's lace work to Mrs. Sutter at the boarding house. If you force this business out, you force that money elsewhere." Pike's eyes narrowed. "You seem suddenly invested in Mrs. Vale." Mrs. Dobbins looked at Ruthie, then at the women, then at Miriam. Her mouth pressed flat. "I'm invested in clean rooms and fewer fools," she said. Mr. Crenshaw, who had been hovering near the alley gate, coughed hard enough to hide a laugh. Pike left without another threat, which was nearly as satisfying as an apology and far more believable. After he was gone, the room remained quiet for several seconds. Then Ada picked up a towel. "Well, shall we offend him further by finishing the work?" The women laughed, not loudly, but with relief. Miriam looked at Mrs. Dobbins. "Thank you." The hotel keeper sniffed. "Do not thank me. Just make sure the depot sheets are finished by Wednesday. If this room is going to become a revolution, it may as well be a punctual one." Then she turned and swept back toward the hotel. By dusk, the other women had gone home, carrying small coins and bundles of mending. Matthew lingered to help Miriam bring in the last dry shirts. Ruthie stood at the window with Jonah's message in both hands. She had asked Miriam to read it 5 times. Each time, the same words seemed to build another small plank beneath her feet. "He sent word. He has blue. Returning by dark if possible." Dark came slowly. Miriam lit the lamp before Ruthie asked. They ate supper near the window. Ruthie saved half a biscuit for Jonah and set it on his empty plate. She put the folded message beside it like proof in a court. "Do you think Blue is scared?" she asked. "Blue has your papa," Miriam said. "I expect he is tired of being brave but managing." Ruthie nodded. "Like us." "Yes," Miriam said softly, "like us." At 8:30, footsteps came in the alley. This time, Ruthie ran to the door before anyone spoke. Jonah appeared beneath the lamp glow, wet to the knees from creek water, face gray with exhaustion but smiling. In one hand he carried his hat. In the other, carefully held by the wooden tail, was Blue. Ruthie took the horse first. Then she threw herself against Jonah. "You sent word," she said into his coat. He knelt, wrapping both arms around her. "I said I would come back, but I figured words travel faster than tired feet." She pulled back and examined him. "You are late." "I am." "But you told." "I did." Her small face worked through this difference. Late was not gone. Delayed was not vanished. A message was not a mother's empty promise before breakfast. At last she nodded. "You may have your biscuit." Jonah looked over her head at Miriam, and the gratitude in his eyes was almost too much to bear. Miriam turned toward the stove. "It is probably hard enough to patch a boot. I have eaten worse." "That does not recommend your judgment." "No," he said, rising slowly. "It rarely has." He sat at the table, Ruthie pressed against his side, and ate the saved biscuit as though it were a feast. Miriam poured coffee, noticing the bruises on his knuckles and the deep weariness in his shoulders. "Was the injured man all right?" she asked. "Broken leg, he will live." "And you?" "I will live too." "That was not my question." His eyes lifted to hers. "I came back whole enough." For now, that had to satisfy her. Later, after Ruthie fell asleep with Blue tucked safely under her chin, Jonah stepped outside to wash creek mud from his boots. Miriam followed with the lantern. The night air was cool. Stars hung clear over the alley. Water ran along the gutter in a thin, silver line. "You sent word to your people," Miriam said. Jonah looked down at the boot in his hand. "That is what the mill clerk asked, where to send the message. I started to say I had none." Her heart tightened. "Then I thought of Ruthie waiting by the lamp," he continued, "and you reading the words to her better than I could have written them." Miriam looked toward the glowing window. "People are beginning to notice," she said. "That I have people. That I may be one of them." He set the boot down slowly. The alley was quiet except for distant laughter from the saloon and the soft hum of insects near the fence. "Miriam," he said, "I would never claim you without being invited." The words were careful, respectful. They should have made things easier. They did not. Because part of her wanted to be claimed by something other than work and widowhood and survival. Part of her wanted to belong to the warm room behind the lamp as much as Ruthie did. Part of her wanted to stop measuring every kindness against what it might cost. But wanting, as Jonah had said, had never been enough. "I'm afraid," she admitted. He did not step closer, "of me. Some." He accepted that. "Of the town. Some. Of Ruthie." Miriam looked at him sharply. His face was gentle but knowing. She turned back toward the window. Through the glass, Ruthie slept with one hand open against the quilt, a child's hand, small, trusting when sleep made it forget fear. "Yes," Miriam whispered, "mostly of her." Jonah's voice softened. "Why?" "Because she is beginning to look at me as if I might stay." "You have stayed." "For days, not years." His silence held understanding. Miriam wrapped her arms around herself. "When Edwin died, the town brought food for 2 weeks. Then everyone returned to their own tables. My mother left me with a letter I did not know existed. You left because life pulled you away, and then stayed away because grief and pride told you to. Ruthie's mother left before breakfast. Everyone has reasons, Jonah. That does not keep absence from hurting." "No," he said quietly, "it does not. If that child gives me some place in her heart, and I fail her." "You will not. You do not know that. I know you worry about it. That is more than many people give children." Miriam's eyes burned. Jonah took one step closer, slowly enough that she could move away if she wanted. "I am afraid too," he said. "Every hour. Afraid I will work too much and miss what she needs. Afraid I will not work enough and fail to feed her. Afraid she will love this place and lose it. Afraid you will wake one morning and remember I am the man who did not come back when you were 19. Miriam looked at him then. "And what if I do remember?" "Then I will stand there and let you." That answer broke something open in her. Not because it fixed the past. Nothing could. Not because it promised ease. They had none to spare. But because he did not ask her to forget in order to begin. He did not ask her to smooth the wound so he could feel forgiven. He only offered to stay near the truth. Miriam looked down at his bruised hands, then reached for the clean cloth tucked in her apron pocket. One of his knuckles had split again. "You are bleeding," she said. "I know. You always say that as if knowing closes the wound." He smiled faintly. "Does it not?" "No." She took his hand and wrapped the cloth around his knuckles. His hand was large, rough, and warm in hers. For a moment, the alley, the town, Pike, the lost years, all faded behind the simple work of binding what was hurt. Jonah watched her. "Miriam." She did not look up. "Do not say anything foolish." "I was going to say thank you." "That is often foolish." He smiled. She tied the cloth and released his hand, but he did not immediately move away. Neither did she. Inside, Ruthie shifted in her sleep and murmured, "Lamp." Miriam looked through the window. "It is still burning," she whispered, though the child could not hear. Jonah stood beside her, close but not touching. Together they watched the small flame hold back the dark. The next day would bring more work, more gossip, more uncertainty, and another morning when Jonah would have to leave and come back again. Healing would not be quick. Trust would not arrive because one message had been sent or one biscuit saved. But that night, something important had changed. Ruthie had learned that late was not the same as gone. Jonah had learned that his people could wait without vanishing. And Miriam had learned that fear did not always mean a door should close. Sometimes it only meant the heart was standing at the threshold, listening for footsteps, trying to believe they might return. The next week changed the shape of Miriam's days. Before Jonah and Ruthie arrived, her mornings had been narrow and predictable. Wake before dawn, light the stove, pump water, boil sheets, scrub until her shoulders burned, eat when there was time, sleep when exhaustion finally made the quiet bearable. Now the washhouse woke in layers. First came Jonah, careful and quiet, stirring the coals back to life before Miriam could scold him for doing her work. Then Ruthie, blinking at the window lamp as though checking that night had not swallowed it. Then Miriam, pretending she had not been listening to both of them breathe in the dark. Breakfast became a ceremony of small trust. Jonah did not leave before Ruthie opened her eyes. Ruthie watched him eat. He let her inspect his lunch bundle. She placed Blue beside his bread most mornings, then took him back before Jonah left, because, as she explained, Blue had decided he liked staying with the lamp better. Jonah accepted this judgment gravely. Each morning, he knelt by the door and let Ruthie set rules. No river. No fighting logs. No forgetting. No coming back too dark. Jonah repeated each rule as if swearing before a judge. Then Ruthie would look at Miriam. You stay. I stay, Miriam would answer. Only then could Jonah leave. At first, the ritual pained Miriam. It showed the child's fear too plainly. But by the end of the week, she began to understand that Ruthie was not only fearing his departure. She was learning how return worked. She was building a bridge one morning at a time, plank by plank, rule by rule. Jonah kept every rule except the one about coming home before dark. The mill work was hard, and the canyon road was often slow with mud and wagons. But every time he was delayed, he sent word if a rider could be found. If no message came, he still arrived, tired and filthy, with his apology ready before Ruthie could ask for it. Each return changed something. Ruthie still ran to him, but no longer like a child escaping drowning. Sometimes she scolded first. Sometimes she demanded to know whether he had eaten all his lunch. Once, when he came in with sawdust in his beard, she laughed and said he looked like a broom that had lost a fight. Jonah laughed too, and Miriam had to turn away, because the sight of them together filled an empty place inside her with such warmth it frightened her. The laundry business grew as well. Mrs. Albright's lace curtains brought new customers from houses Miriam had only passed from the outside. The depot boarding house sent sheets twice a week. Mr. Crenshaw convinced 3 miners to bring their clothes to Miriam instead of beating them in the creek with rocks. Ada Whitcomb came every day now, and Mrs. Kessler came whenever her baby allowed. They were no longer visitors. They had become part of the room's rhythm. Miriam paid them what she could. It was not much, but it was honest. More than that, it let the women go home with money earned by their own hands instead of pity tucked in a basket beneath stale bread. Miriam knew the difference. Her pride knew it too. On Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Dobbin stood in the doorway watching the busy washhouse with her usual look of suspicion. Though by now Miriam suspected suspicion was only the shape the woman's face had learned to make when she was touched. This place sounds like a henhouse, Mrs. Dobbin said. Ada wrung out a towel. Then it is fortunate we are producing something more useful than eggs. Mrs. Kessler laughed. Miriam waited for Mrs. Dobbins to snap back, but the hotel keeper only sniffed and placed a ledger on the table. What is this? Miriam asked. Orders. I have a slate. A slate can be wiped clean by damp sleeves and careless children. Mrs. Dobbins looked pointedly at Matthew, who had once spilled rinse water across Miriam's chalked list. A ledger remembers. Miriam opened it. Inside, Mrs. Dobbins had written columns in neat dark ink. Customer, bundle, due date, paid, owed, notes. There were already 3 pages prepared. Miriam stared at the careful lines. I cannot pay you for this. I did not ask you to. considerate protection for the hotel's linens. Of course. Mrs. Dobbins turned to leave, then paused. And protection for women who cannot afford to lose track of coins. Miriam looked up. For one moment, the two widows, one by death, one perhaps by disappointment, though Mrs. Dobbins never said, understood each other plainly. "Thank you," Miriam said. The hotel keeper's mouth tightened. "Your stove is smoking. Open the flue." Then she left. Ruthie climbed onto a stool to look at the ledger. "Are we important now?" Miriam brushed a loose hair behind the child's ear. "We were important before the book." Ruthie traced one finger along the columns without touching the ink. "But now the book knows." "Yes," Miriam said softly, "now the book knows." That evening, Jonah came home early for once. The sun still rested above the western roofs, spilling gold into the alley. Miriam was taking down dry sheets when Ruthie saw him at the gate and ran. He caught her easily, lifting her high enough that her yellow ribbon flashed in the light. "You're not dark," she said, touching his face as if confirming it. "No." "Did the logs behave?" "Not naturally, but I persuaded them." She nodded approvingly. "Miriam made beans." "Then I have lived a blessed day." Miriam watched them from beneath the laundry line, a sheet half folded over her arms. Jonah's eyes found hers over Ruthie's shoulder. He smiled, not broadly, not like a young fool full of certainty, but with a tired, grateful tenderness that made Miriam's hands go still. It was dangerous, that look. Not because it demanded anything. Because it asked nothing and still reached her. After supper, Jonah said he had a surprise. Ruthie became instantly suspicious. "Is it medicine?" "No." "Is it church?" "No." "Is it a bath?" Jonah glanced at Miriam. "She has learned caution from you." "I respect her instincts," Miriam said. Jonah went outside and returned carrying a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. He placed it on the table in front of Ruthie. She opened it carefully. Inside lay a little tin lantern, no taller than Miriam's hand. It was dented and old, but polished clean. A narrow handle arched over the top, and the glass chimney had only one small chip near the rim. Ruthie gasped, "A baby lamp." Jonah's face softened. "Mr. Fenner had it in a box of cast-off things at the livery. I traded 2 harness repairs for it." Ruthie touched it with reverence. "For me." "For you, but Miriam must decide when it can be lit." Ruthie looked at Miriam immediately, hope shining in her face. Miriam inspected the lantern with serious care. "It may sit on the table during supper. It may be lit only when grown hands are near. It may not sleep in the bed, ride blue, or move into the flour tin." Ruthie nodded at every rule. "Can it sit by the window?" Miriam's heart gave a small ache. "Yes," she said, "beside the big lamp." Ruthie carried it to the sill and set it there. The little lantern looked poor and brave beside Miriam's lamp, as if a child had decided to stand guard with an elder. Jonah came beside Miriam. "I thought she might like something that belongs to staying," he said quietly. Miriam looked at the 2 lamps. "That was a kind thought." "I am trying to have more of them." "You had kind thoughts when you were young." "I had easy ones," he said. "I'm not sure they were the same." That answer stayed with her. Later, after Ruthie fell asleep, Miriam stepped outside with the ledger to count orders by lamplight. Jonah sat on the back step mending Matthew's torn shoe, his large hands careful with the small sole. The night was mild. Crickets sang near the fence. From Main Street came faint music from the saloon, softened by distance until it almost sounded innocent. Miriam watched his hands work. "Matthew's shoe?" she asked. "He said it was fine." "That means it was not." Jonah glanced up. "You have a way of translating pride." "I speak it fluently." He smiled. She sat on the other end of the step, leaving a respectable space between them. Respectability had become less about Pike now and more about her own need to move carefully. Jonah seemed to understand. He never crowded her, never pressed old love into new wounds. He stayed near, useful and patient, and somehow that patience unsettled her more than boldness would have. After a while he said, "The mill job ends Saturday." Miriam's pencil stopped above the ledger. "So soon?" "The flume will be clear. They may need men again later, but not steady." She kept her eyes on the page. "What will you do?" "I heard the freight office needs drivers." "That is farther." "Yes." "How much farther?" "Depends on the route." She looked at him then. "Jonah." He set Matthew's shoe down. "I do not want to take it." "Then why mention it?" "Because wages matter." "So does coming home." The words came too naturally now. Home. She seemed unable to keep it behind her teeth. Jonah heard it. His face changed with that same quiet wonder. "I know," he said. Miriam closed the ledger slowly. "There may be work here." "At the laundry." She braced herself against embarrassment. "The orders are more than we can manage. The roof still needs reinforcing. We need a second stove before winter if this continues. A proper wash bench. Shelves. A delivery cart someday if wishing did not cost too much." Jonah listened without interrupting. "I cannot pay mill wages," she said. "Not now, but perhaps room, food. A share when orders grow." "A share?" "This business is not only mine anymore," Miriam said, then felt her face warm. "Not if you are the one repairing half of it and carrying the other half on your back." Jonah was quiet so long she feared she had said too much. Then he looked toward the window, where the two lamps rested side by side. "You would tie your livelihood to a man who arrived with a child and no money?" he asked. "I would tie my livelihood to work that is already being done," she swallowed, "and to a man who comes back." His eyes returned to her. The night seemed to gather closer. "I want to say yes so badly that I do not trust myself," he said. "Why?" "Because wanting a place has made me foolish before." "You were not foolish for wanting a place." "I was foolish for thinking a place could save Eliza from herself. Foolish for believing work could make Ruthie forget her mother leaving. Foolish for thinking if I kept moving, I would stay ahead of loss." Miriam's voice softened. "And now?" "Now I am afraid if I stop moving, loss will know where to find me." Miriam looked down at her hands. The ledger rested across her knees, full of names, work, coins owed, dates promised. A week ago, it would have seemed impossible that so many lives could begin threading themselves through her little room. "Loss already knows every address," she said. "Running only means it finds you tired." Jonah let out a breath, almost a laugh but not quite. "You always could put mercy inside a hard sentence." "I have had practice." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "If I stay, Silver Creek will talk harder." "It already talks." "Pike may press you." "He already presses." "Ruthie may grow attached." Miriam looked through the window at the sleeping child. Her small lantern sat unlit beside the larger flame. "She already has." Jonah followed her gaze. "And you?" he asked quietly. Miriam did not answer. She could not. Because the truth rose too quickly, and it frightened her with its shape. She had grown attached to Ruthie's solemn questions, to Jonah's careful footsteps at dawn, to the sound of another cup being set on the table, to the way the room no longer fell silent around her after dark. She had grown attached to the life forming before anyone had given it permission. Before she could speak, a rider came down the alley at a hard trot. Both Miriam and Jonah stood. The rider was a boy from the depot, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mrs. Vale." "Yes." There's a woman asking at the station. Miriam's hand tightened around the ledger. Asking what? The boy looked from Miriam to Jonah, uncertain. Jonah stepped forward. Say it. She asked if a man named Jonah Mercer came through with a little girl. The night seemed to drop its temperature. Miriam looked at Jonah. All color had left his face. Did she give a name? He asked. The boy nodded. Eliza Mercer. For a moment, no one moved. Inside the washhouse, Ruthie slept peacefully beneath the quilt, unaware that the past had just stepped off another train. Jonah gripped the back of the chair beside him, as if the ground had shifted. Miriam looked through the window at the little lantern on the sill. Something inside her, something newly warmed and newly vulnerable, went very still. The boy shifted in the saddle. She is waiting at the depot, says she wants her daughter. Jonah closed his eyes. Miriam heard Ruthie breathe softly in the room behind them. The lamp flame moved once in the glass, bending as if touched by wind. And all at once, the home they had barely begun to build felt as fragile as light. Jonah did not go to the depot at once. For several long seconds, he stood in the washhouse doorway with one hand braced against the chair and the other pressed flat against his chest, as if the name had struck him hard enough to stop his breathing. Eliza Mercer. Miriam watched him, and in that moment she saw every hard mile he had walked trying not to say that name aloud. She had known Ruthie's mother was alive. Jonah had told her plainly enough. But alive somewhere was different from waiting at the depot. Alive somewhere was sorrow without shape. Waiting at the depot had eyes, hands, a voice, and a claim. The boy on the horse shifted uneasily. Should I tell her you're coming? Jonah opened his eyes. Tell her I will come. The boy nodded and rode off toward Main Street, hooves striking sparks from the stones in the alley. Miriam closed the washhouse door softly behind him, as if the sound might wake Ruthie and make the whole world change before they were ready. Jonah did not turn around. She found us, he said. His voice was not angry. Anger might have been easier. It was hollow, stunned, and afraid. Miriam held the ledger against her waist. Did you think she would? No, he swallowed. Yes, I do not know. Some nights I imagined her walking into every room I entered. Other nights I convinced myself she had forgotten we existed. Did you want her to find you? That question was crueler than Miriam intended, but once spoken, it stood between them with its head lifted. Jonah finally looked at her. I wanted Ruthie to stop waking afraid, he said. That was all I knew how to want. Miriam nodded, ashamed of the jealousy that had risen in her so quickly. Eliza had been gone before breakfast. Eliza had left a child with a wound too deep for words. Yet Eliza was still Ruthie's mother, and grief did not ask permission before protecting its own place. Inside the room, Ruthie stirred on the cot. Jonah turned at once. The little girl rolled onto her side, one hand searching blindly until it found blue. Then she settled again, unaware that the name she had learned to ask about in fragments now waited under the harsh depot lamps. Jonah's shoulders folded. I cannot bring Eliza here tonight, he said. No. And I cannot go without telling Ruthie, if there is any chance Eliza follows me back. Miriam took a breath. Then tell her only what a child can carry. He looked at her. What can a child carry? Miriam thought of her mother's hidden letter, Edwin's fever, Pike's threats, and Ruthie standing beside the flour tin full of feelings. More than we wish, she said, less than we often give them. Jonah closed his eyes briefly. Stay with her while I speak. The request moved through Miriam in two directions at once. It warmed her because he needed her. It wounded her because this was not her story to stand inside. Yet Ruthie had made room for Miriam in small ways, a hand on a sleeve, a question before sleep, a glance toward the lamp. Perhaps love, Even unfinished love required standing where it hurt. Yes, she said. Jonah crossed to the cot and knelt. Dove. Ruthie frowned in her sleep. Ruthie, wake a little. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked at Jonah first, then Miriam. Fear sharpened her face before words came. You're here. I am here. It's dark. I know. She sat up, clutching Blue. Did I do wrong? No. Jonah sat on the cot edge and took one of her small hands. You did nothing wrong. Miriam remained a step behind him, close enough to be felt but not crowding the child's first shelter. Jonah's throat worked. Someone came to town tonight. Ruthie held very still. Someone who knew us before. Her fingers tightened. Miss Tamsin. No, never her. The child breathed. Jonah's voice lowered. Your mother. The word changed the room. Ruthie did not cry. She did not move. She simply stared at him with eyes too large for her face. Mama. Yes. Ruthie looked down at Blue, then at the little lantern in the window. She came back after breakfast. Jonah flinched. Miriam's hands curled into her skirt. I do not know why she came now, he said softly. I only know she is at the depot and I need to speak with her. Ruthie's lower lip trembled. She wants me. The question was small enough to fit in a teacup and heavy enough to break the table. Jonah pulled her gently into his arms. She asked for you. Ruthie did not lean into him at first. Do I have to go? No, Jonah said at once. Not tonight, not without me, not without knowing what is true. Ruthie looked over his shoulder at Miriam. There was a question there too, not spoken, not fair. A child asking whether the new place of safety could hold if the old wound walked in. Miriam came closer and knelt beside the cot. I will keep the lamp lit. Ruthie's face crumpled. She reached for Miriam with one hand while still holding Jonah with the other. Miriam took that hand. The three of them stayed that way for a long moment, joined not by certainty, but by fear. At last Jonah rose. Ruthie would not let go of his fingers. You're going. I have to speak with her. No. I will come back. Ruthie shook her head hard. You said that. And I have done it. But she said it too. Jonah knelt again. His face was full of pain, but his voice did not shake. Then watch the lamp. Miriam will sit with you. I will bring my answer back to this room before midnight. Ruthie stared at him. Promise this one. Yes, Jonah said. I promise this one. Miriam saw the weight he accepted when he said it. Some promises were not made because life could guarantee them. They were made because love needed a place to stand. Ruthie slowly released his hand. Jonah put on his hat and went out. Miriam bolted the door after him. Ruthie sat on the cot, eyes fixed on the window. Her face had gone strangely calm. Miriam knew that calm. It was not peace. It was a child gathering herself around the fear that the world might split open. Would you like tea? Miriam asked. No. Would you like blue? Ruthie already held him. Would you like me to sit beside you? The child nodded once. Miriam sat. For nearly an hour they did not speak. The lamp burned steadily on the sill. The smaller lantern sat unlit beside it. Outside, the alley lay quiet except for the occasional sound of boots passing on Main Street. Somewhere far away, a train whistle moaned into the dark, low and lonely. Ruthie finally whispered, "What if Mama wants me because she is better?" Miriam's heart tightened. Then your papa will listen. What if she wants me because she is lonely? Then your papa will listen carefully. What if she wants me because I am hers? Miriam closed her eyes for a second. There were questions adults could not answer without breaking something. You are not a coat to be claimed from a peg, Miriam said softly. You are a child. Your heart matters. Ruthie looked at her. But children have to go where grown people say. Sometimes, Miriam admitted, but good grown people ask what keeps a child safe. Ruthie studied this. Are you good grown people? Miriam almost answered too quickly. Instead, she took the question seriously because Ruthie did. I am trying to be. Ruthie leaned against her side. That small weight nearly undid Miriam. At the depot, Jonah found Eliza sitting on a bench beneath a soot-blackened lamp. He stopped 10 feet away. For a moment he saw the girl she had been when he first met her in Leadville, dark hair pinned with a scrap of green ribbon, flower on her sleeve, laughter too bright for the boarding house kitchen. Then the present settled over her. She was thinner now, her cheekbones sharp, her dress travel-worn but clean, her hands twisted together in her lap. She looked up. Jonah. He removed his hat. Eliza. Her eyes searched behind him. Where is Ruthie? Safe. The word was deliberate. Pain crossed her face. You think I came to hurt her? I think you hurt her when you left. Eliza lowered her eyes. Yes. The honesty disarmed him, more than denial would have. He sat on the far end of the bench, leaving space between them. A few passengers moved in the depot shadows. The night clerk pretended not to listen and failed. Eliza looked at Jonah's rough hands. She is well. She is frightened. She is growing. She likes lamps. She still has the wooden horse you carved. A sob caught in Eliza's throat, but she forced it down. Blue. You remember his name. I remember everything, she whispered. That is part of the punishment. Jonah stared at the station floorboards. Why are you here? She drew a folded paper from her reticule. I have been working at a laundry in Trinidad, then a hotel kitchen, then sewing at a mission house. I have been sober in mind and spirit for 8 months. Jonah looked at her. I know that does not undo leaving, she said quickly. I know, but I have a room now. A widow named Mrs. Bell keeps boarders. She says I can bring my child if I pay regular. Your child. Our child. His jaw tightened. Eliza accepted the correction before he spoke. Your child, if that is what my leaving made true. Silence stretched between them. A locomotive hissed somewhere beyond the platform, breathing steam into the cold night. Eliza's hands shook around the paper. I thought Ruthie would be better without me. She was 4. I know. She woke asking for sugared bread. Eliza's face collapsed. She covered her mouth with her hand, but the sound escaped anyway. I bought it, she whispered. That morning, I bought the bread. I walked as far as the baker, and then I kept walking because I knew if I went back, I would leave again another day and another, and each leaving would teach her worse. You taught her enough. Yes. Jonah had imagined this meeting many times. In some imaginings he shouted. In others, he turned away and denied her even the sight of his face. But now, seeing her small and wrecked by the very truth he carried, anger could not stay pure. It became grief. Why now? He asked. Eliza wiped her cheeks. Because I heard a freight man speak of you at the mill. He said there was a man named Mercer working the flume and a little girl waiting at a laundry with a lamp. I knew it had to be her. I came because if I did not come now, I would spend the rest of my life proving only that I was still a coward. Jonah leaned back against the bench. The laundry with a lamp. Miriam had become part of Ruthie's description in the world. The thought steadied him and hurt him all at once. Eliza noticed, there is someone. Jonah did not answer immediately. She was my first love, he said at last, a long time ago. Eliza's expression changed, not with jealousy but with understanding. And now? She gave Ruthie a safe place before she owed me a kind word. Eliza nodded, tears still bright in her eyes. Then she is better than I was. That is not what this is about. Isn't it? Eliza looked toward the platform. A mother should be the safest place. Jonah said nothing, because he had believed that once too. Eliza unfolded the paper. I'm not asking to take Ruthie tonight. I thought I was on the train. I told myself I had a right. I held that right like a ticket. But sitting here, hearing myself ask where she is, I realize a right is not the same as being ready. Jonah looked at her sharply. She held out the paper. This is the address where I am staying. This is a letter from the mission matron saying I work steady. I want to see Ruthie. I want to begin making amends if she will allow it, if you will allow it. His hands remained still. I will not hand her pain back to you just because you came with papers, he said. I know. She has begun trusting the world again. Eliza's voice broke. Then do not let me ruin that. Jonah looked at the woman who had left before breakfast and the mother who had crossed miles to admit she had no right to demand a child's heart. Both were Eliza. That was the hardest part. He took the paper. I will speak to Miriam, he said. Eliza's eyes lifted. Miriam. She is the one sitting with Ruthie tonight. For a moment, Eliza looked as though she might cry again, but she only nodded. Then speak to her. A woman who keeps a child through a night like this deserves a voice in what comes next. That surprised him. He stood. I promised Ruthie I would return before midnight. Eliza closed her hands in her lap. Does she hate me? Jonah stopped. He thought of Ruthie asking whether her mother wanted her because she was lonely. He thought of the flour tin, the lamp, the rules at breakfast, the wooden horse. She is 5, he said quietly. Her heart does not know how to hate you cleanly. It only knows you left. Eliza bowed her head. Jonah put on his hat and walked back into the night. When he reached the washhouse, the lamp was still burning. Miriam opened the door before he knocked. Ruthie stood behind her, pale and wide-eyed in the glow. You came before midnight, Ruthie said. Jonah stepped inside and shut the door against the cold. Yes. Did Mama come too? No. The child swallowed. Jonah knelt, tired down to the bone. She wants to see you, but not tonight, not until we know what is best. Ruthie looked at Miriam, then back at him. Is she better? Jonah thought carefully. She is trying to be. Trying is not same as better. No, he said, it is not. Ruthie looked down at Blue in her hands. Does she want him back? The question broke him more than the others. No, Dove, Blue belongs to you. Ruthie nodded slowly. Then her face crumpled and she began to cry. Jonah reached for her, but she turned first into Miriam's skirt. Miriam gathered her close, shocked and aching. Jonah looked at them, pain flickering across his face, but he did not pull Ruthie away. He only moved closer and placed one hand on his daughter's back. Together, they let her weep. No one told her she should be happy. No one told her a mother's return was a miracle. No one told her to forgive before her heart knew how. The little room held all of it: fear, anger, hope, grief, confusion, and the fragile mercy of adults who did not force a child to pretend. Much later, Ruthie fell asleep between them on the cot, one hand clutching Miriam's sleeve and the other holding Jonah's finger. Miriam sat very still. Jonah sat on the floor beside the cot, his head bowed. She did not ask to go with her, he whispered. No. She did not ask to see her. Not yet. He looked up at Miriam. What do I do? It was the first time he had asked like that, not as a man looking for permission to stay or leave, as a father who knew love alone was not enough to answer every wound. Miriam looked down at Ruthie's sleeping face. You go slow, she said. So slow the town gets impatient and heaven itself starts tapping its foot. A tired breath of laughter escaped him. Then silence returned. Miriam looked toward the two lamps on the sill, one tall, one small, both unsteady in the draft, both still burning. "Tomorrow," she said, "we decide what one safe step looks like." Jonah nodded. Outside, a train whistle sounded once beyond the depot, then faded into the mountains. The past had returned. But for that night, it had not taken Ruthie. For that night the door was bolted, the lamp was lit, and the child slept inside the circle of two people who had promised not to let the grown world tear her heart in half. Morning came pale and cold, with a thin frost silvering the alley boards. Miriam had slept less than an hour. She rose before the stove had fully died and found Jonah still sitting on the floor beside the cot. Ruthie slept curled toward him, one small hand tucked against Miriam's folded shawl. Jonah's head leaned back against the wall, eyes open, face gray with exhaustion. "You did not sleep," Miriam whispered. That is not an answer. It is what I have." She moved quietly to the stove and fed in kindling. The first flames caught slow, licking around the wood as though even fire was tired. For several minutes neither of them spoke. They had both reached that worn place where fear became practical. Coffee, heat, breakfast, water. Small things first, because large things could crush a person if faced all at once. Ruthie stirred when the kettle began to hum. Her eyes opened, and for a moment Miriam saw the whole night return to her. The depot, her mother, Jonah's promise, tears on the cot. She did not cry again. She only looked at Jonah and then at Miriam. "Is Mama still here?" she asked. Jonah sat forward. "In town, yes." "Is she coming?" "Not until we decide together." Ruthie rubbed Blue's wooden back with her thumb. "Together means me." Jonah's throat moved. "Yes, Dove, together means you too." The child thought about this so seriously that Miriam's heart ached. "Then not before oats," Ruthie said. Jonah's face softened with something like relief. "Not before oats." So they ate breakfast. It was the strangest meal Miriam had ever served. Oatmeal steamed in bowls. Coffee darkened tin cups. A cold fear sat at the table like a fourth adult. Ruthie placed Blue beside her bowl and the little lantern beside Blue, as if both might need food too. No one rushed her. After breakfast, Miriam sent word through Matthew Whitcomb that the washhouse would open late. It felt almost wicked to delay work with so many bundles waiting, but some mornings demanded the dignity of being met fully. Laundry could wait an hour. A child's heart could not. Jonah sat at the table with Eliza's address paper unfolded before him. Ruthie stood on the chair to see it. "Can she write?" Ruthie asked. "Yes," Jonah said. "Did she write me?" Jonah hesitated. Miriam saw the hesitation and knew the answer would matter. "No," he said gently, "not yet." Ruthie's face tightened, but she nodded once. "Then I don't write first." Jonah looked at Miriam, uncertain. Miriam only shook her head slightly. Let the child keep what pride she could. Ruthie climbed down. "I can see her from far." Jonah leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "Far, like across the street." Miriam sat beside her. "Would you want to speak to her?" Ruthie held Blue tighter. "Maybe if she doesn't come close fast." Jonah covered his mouth with one hand, trying to master himself. Miriam reached for the ledger and tore a clean half-page from the back, though Mrs. Dobbins would likely scold her for damaging the book. She set it on the table. "Then we write rules," she said. Ruthie blinked. "For Mama." "For grown people." That seemed to interest the child. Miriam dipped the pen and began. Ruthie spoke slowly, and Miriam wrote each rule in clear letters. Eliza must not run to Ruthie. Eliza must not touch Ruthie unless Ruthie asks. Jonah must stay beside Ruthie. Miriam must stay where Ruthie can see her. Blue comes. The little lantern stays home because it is not ready for hard things. At that Jonah nearly smiled, then bowed his head. When the rules were finished, Miriam sanded the ink and read them back. Ruthie listened with the grave approval of a judge hearing fair law. Add 1, Ruthie said. Miriam waited. If I say no, no means no. Miriam wrote it. Jonah looked at the page for a long time. That one should have been written for her long before now. No one asked which her he meant. Ruthie, Eliza, Miriam, perhaps all of them. By 10 o'clock, Jonah went to the depot alone to tell Eliza the terms. Miriam stayed with Ruthie and opened the washhouse door to work, because waiting with idle hands could turn a room sour. Ada arrived first, then Mrs. Kessler, then 2 others. They all noticed Ruthie's stillness. They noticed Miriam's pale face, but word had already moved, as word always did. Eliza Mercer had stepped off the late train. Eliza Mercer had asked for her child. Eliza Mercer was alive. No one said it until Mrs. Dobbins entered with hotel pillowcases. She looked at Miriam, then at Ruthie, then set the bundle down with unusual care. Does the child need people to mind their tongues today? She asked. Miriam's respect for the woman grew another reluctant inch. Yes. Mrs. Dobbins turned toward the room. Then anyone who cannot do that may take their work to the creek and freeze their hands there. No one argued. Ruthie sat near the window with Blue in her lap. She was not playing. She was preparing. Every so often she touched the folded page of rules tucked beneath her apron sash. Near noon, Jonah returned. Eliza was not with him. Ruthie ran to the doorway but stopped before reaching him. Did she say yes? Jonah knelt. She said yes. All of them. All of them. Was she mad? No. Was she sad? Yes. Ruthie nodded. Sad seemed safer than mad. Jonah looked at Miriam. She will meet us near the empty bandstand at 2, public enough, quiet enough. She said she will stand on the far side until Ruthie chooses otherwise. Miriam felt the washhouse listen around them. Ada's hands paused in the rinse tub. Mrs. Dobbins stiffened near the towels. Even Matthew stopped sorting socks. Ruthie looked at Miriam. You come. Yes, Miriam said, if you still want me. Ruthie took her hand. I wrote it. At 1:30, Miriam helped Ruthie brush her hair. The yellow ribbon had become frayed at the end, but Ruthie wanted it tied anyway. Miriam made 2 neat braids and fastened the ribbon carefully. Ruthie wore the cleanest dress they had, brown wool with a patched cuff. Her boots were scrubbed, though one still leaned inward at the heel. Jonah washed at the basin and put on his mendied coat. He looked like a man going to court, except no court in the territory could have judged him harder than his own child's face. Miriam wore her dark dress and Edwin's old shawl. She almost removed it twice. It felt strange to carry a dead husband's wool into a meeting with Jonah's living wife. Then she left it on. Edwin had been part of her life. Eliza had been part of Jonah's. None of them could begin honestly by pretending ghosts did not walk beside them. They left the washhouse together. Silver Creek noticed. Of course it did. A man outside the barber shop stopped shaving another man's neck to peer through the window. 2 women near the post office bent their heads close. Mr. Crenshaw stood in front of the mercantile with his broom still in his hand, his face kind but worried. Mrs. Albright paused at her carriage and watched without hiding it. Ruthie held Jonah's left hand and Miriam's right. She walked between them down Main Street with Blue pressed under one arm and the rules folded beneath her sash. Each step was small, but she did not turn back. The empty bandstand stood at the edge of the square, left over from a 4th of July celebration years earlier. Its paint had peeled. Weeds grew near the steps. A few cottonwoods gave shade along the far side. Eliza stood beneath one of them. She wore the same travel dress from the night before, but her hair was brushed smooth and pinned simply. Her hands were empty. That mattered. She had brought no gifts, no sugared bread, no bright object to buy forgiveness from a child. She stood with her arms at her sides, trembling visibly even from across the square. Ruthie stopped. Jonah stopped with her. Miriam felt the child's hand tighten. "That is her," Ruthie whispered. "Yes," Jonah said. Ruthie stared. Eliza did not move closer. Tears slipped down her face, but she wiped them quickly and stayed where she was. "She looks smaller," Ruthie said. Jonah's voice was rough. People sometimes do when they are sorry. Ruthie looked up at him. "Was she bigger before?" "To you, maybe." The child considered this. Then she reached into her sash and pulled out the rules. "Miriam," she said. Miriam unfolded the paper. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. She read the rules aloud, not loudly, but clearly enough that Eliza could hear across the distance. When she reached the last rule, "If I say no, no means no," Eliza covered her mouth and nodded. Ruthie watched her. She agreed. "Yes," Miriam said. Ruthie let go of Miriam's hand but not Jonah's. "I go halfway." They walked halfway across the square. Miriam stayed behind, where Ruthie could see her. Jonah knelt beside Ruthie, still holding her hand. Eliza remained under the cottonwood until Ruthie lifted her chin. "You can say words," Ruthie called. Eliza made a small broken sound, then pressed one hand against her own chest as if holding herself in place. "Hello, Ruthie," she said. Ruthie frowned. "You remember my name?" "Yes." "You remember Blue?" Eliza looked at the wooden horse. "Yes, I carved him from a broken chair leg. You cried because he was not blue." Ruthie held him tighter. "He is blue inside." "I know," Eliza whispered. "You told me." Ruthie's face changed. A memory had been answered, something from before abandonment, something small and real. She looked at Jonah. "She knows." Jonah nodded. Eliza took one step forward, then stopped herself so abruptly it seemed to hurt. "I am staying where I was told," she said. Ruthie watched that too. For a child who had known adults breaking promises, a grown woman stopping herself mattered more than any speech. "Why did you leave?" Ruthie asked. The square went silent in Miriam's ears. Eliza lowered herself slowly to her knees in the grass, still far away, making herself less frightening. "Because I was very sick in my heart and mind," she said. "Because I made a wrong choice. Because I thought leaving once would hurt you less than leaving again and again. But I was wrong. I hurt you. I am sorry." Ruthie's eyes filled. "You said sugared bread." "I bought it," Eliza whispered. "Then I did not bring it back. That was wrong too." "Did you eat it?" Eliza closed her eyes. "No, I threw it away because I was ashamed." Ruthie looked furious suddenly. "I wanted it." A sob broke from Eliza before she could stop it. "I know." Ruthie stomped one foot. "You wasted my bread." It was such a child's accusation, so small beside the larger wound, and yet somehow containing all of it. The promised sweetness, the waiting, the empty doorway, the hunger for more than food. Eliza bowed her head. "Yes." Ruthie pulled her hand from Jonah's and took one step forward by herself. Jonah tensed but did not stop her. Miriam forgot to breathe. Ruthie stood with Blue clutched to her chest. "I am mad." "You should be," Eliza said. "I cried." "I know." Papa cried too, but quiet. Eliza looked at Jonah with fresh pain. "I believe that." Miriam has a flower tin for big feelings. Eliza blinked through tears. "That sounds wise." "It is," Blue went in it. I am sorry to Blue also. Ruthie thought about this. He is still mad medium. Eliza nodded solemnly. Then I will not ask him to forgive me fast. Ruthie looked back at Miriam. Miriam gave no instruction. This had to belong to the child. Ruthie turned again. I don't go with you. Eliza's face twisted, but she held steady. I understand. Not today. I understand. Maybe I see you again if Papa says and Miriam says and I say. Eliza nodded, all three. And no sugared bread. Eliza looked confused. Ruthie's voice trembled. Not until I ask. Understanding dawned. Eliza pressed both hands to her heart. Not until you ask. Ruthie stepped backward until she reached Jonah. He gathered her clothes, but she kept facing Eliza. Goodbye, Mama, she said. Eliza bent forward as though the words had both blessed and wounded her. Goodbye, Ruthie. Miriam stood where she had promised, unable to move. Jonah lifted Ruthie into his arms and walked back toward her. The child reached for Miriam before they even reached the bandstand. Miriam took her, surprised by the sudden transfer, and Ruthie buried her face in Miriam's neck. Go home, Ruthie whispered. Miriam held her tight. Yes. Jonah looked back at Eliza. She was still kneeling beneath the tree, one hand pressed against the grass, weeping silently but not calling after them. That restraint was the first true gift she had given Ruthie in years. They walked back through town without speaking. People watched again, but Miriam barely noticed. Ruthie was heavy in her arms, and Jonah walked beside them like a man who had survived something without yet knowing the cost. At the washhouse, Ruthie asked to put Blue in the flour tin. Miriam opened it. Ruthie placed the wooden horse inside gently this time, not thrown in anger. Medium big feelings, she said. Miriam nodded, a proper place for them. Then Ruthie climbed onto the cot and slept for nearly 3 hours. Jonah sat outside under the repaired shed roof, his hands hanging between his knees. Miriam joined him after the women finished the day's work and went home quietly. The afternoon had turned warm. Dust floated in the alley light. Somewhere, Mrs. Dobbins was scolding a hotel boy for dropping clean towels. Ordinary life had the nerve to continue. Jonah spoke first. She did better than I deserved. Ruthie. Eliza. Miriam looked at him. He rubbed his face with both hands. I wanted her to be cruel. It would have made things cleaner. Yes. She was not. No. I do not know what to do with that. Miriam leaned back against the wall. You do not have to decide her whole future today. She wants to see Ruthie again. Ruthie said maybe. And you? The question surprised her. What about me? You are in the rule now, Jonah said softly. Ruthie made you part of the answer. Miriam looked toward the open door. Ruthie slept curled beneath the quilt. The little lantern sat on the sill beside the larger lamp, unlit in daylight but still somehow watchful. I do not know what that makes me, Miriam said. Jonah turned to her. It makes you someone she trusts. That is not a name. No, he said, but it is a beginning. Miriam closed her eyes for a moment. Names frightened her. Widow, first love, hired help, father, mother, wife. Each name carried duties, losses, claims, and histories. Trust seemed smaller, but perhaps it was stronger because it had been earned in ordinary hours. Before she could answer, Mrs. Dobbins appeared at the doorway. You have a visitor, she said. Miriam stiffened. Pike. No. The hotel keeper looked toward Jonah, then back at Miriam. Her expression was unreadable. The minister. Miriam stood. Reverend Abel Sutter entered the alley a moment later, hat in hand. He was a narrow man in his 60s with a gentle stoop and eyes that had seen enough deathbeds to stop speaking quickly. Miriam knew him well. He had buried Edwin. He had once brought her firewood without mentioning charity. He had never asked why she left church early in winter. "Mrs. Vale," he said. "Reverend." His gaze moved to Jonah, Mr. Mercer. Jonah stood respectfully. "Sir." The minister looked through the open door at Ruthie sleeping inside. "I saw what happened in the square." Miriam's chin lifted. "Then you saw a child treated carefully." "I did." The answer disarmed her. Reverend Sutter stepped beneath the shed roof. "Mrs. Albright has informed me that certain people are troubled by your household arrangement." Miriam braced herself. He continued, "Mrs. Dobbins has informed me those people are fools." Jonah coughed once. Mrs. Dobbins, still at the doorway, looked away as if bored. The minister's mouth twitched. "My concern is simpler. A child has come into complicated mercy. Complicated mercy is still mercy, but it requires witnesses." "Witnesses?" Miriam asked. "People who will speak truth if gossip twists it. People who will say the child is being fed, watched, and kept safe. People who will ensure no adult's longing outruns her good." His words settled deeply. Miriam looked at Jonah. He looked back, and she saw the same understanding in his face. Reverend Sutter held out a folded paper. "Mrs. Albright, Mr. Crenshaw, Mrs. Dobbins, Mrs. Whitcomb, and I have signed this statement. It says the laundry employs Mr. Mercer and several local women. It says the child remains in her father's care. It says Mrs. Vale's household has shown no disorder beyond excessive steam and stubbornness." Mrs. Dobbins muttered, "I did not agree to excessive." The minister ignored her. Miriam took the paper. Her eyes blurred as she read the names. In a town that had watched her with suspicion, 5 people had put themselves between her and the worst of it. "Why?" she asked softly. Reverend Sutter's expression gentled. "Because sometimes a lamp in a window becomes a town's conscience before the town is ready to admit it." Miriam could not speak. Jonah removed his hat and looked down. The minister turned to him. "Mr. Mercer, if Ruthie's mother seeks lawful claim, matters may grow difficult. I advise patience, records, witnesses, and no secret meetings. The child's welfare must be plain to all." Jonah nodded. "Yes, sir." "And Mrs. Vale?" "Yes." "Come to church when you are ready. Sit where you please. Anyone who stares too long will answer to me after the benediction." A laugh escaped Miriam, sudden and wet with tears. The minister smiled, placed his hat back on, and left with Mrs. Dobbins following close behind. Miriam stood holding the paper. Jonah's voice was quiet. "You are not alone in this room anymore." She looked toward the washhouse. The tubs, the lines, the cot, the ledger, the flour tin, the lamps, the sleeping child. "No," she said. As evening settled, Ruthie woke and asked for soup. She did not mention Eliza at first. She ate quietly while Jonah told her the minister had come. "Did he bring church?" she asked suspiciously. "Only paper," Jonah said. "Good." After supper, she asked to take blue out of the flour tin. Miriam opened it. Ruthie removed the horse, held him against her cheek, and whispered, "Not all better." "No," Miriam agreed, "not all better. But not in the tin now. That is progress." Ruthie carried Blue to the window and set him between the big lamp and the little lantern. "He can watch both." Jonah lit the lamp. Miriam lit the little lantern, just for a few minutes because grown hands were near. 2 flames glowed side by side. Ruthie stood between Jonah and Miriam, holding one hand from each of them. Outside, Silver Creek moved into night. The depot whistle blew once. Somewhere in town, Eliza Mercer sat alone with her own grief and perhaps her first honest patience. The future had become harder, not easier. But it had also become clearer. Ruthie would not be dragged by anyone's guilt. Jonah would not decide alone out of fear. Miriam would not hide simply because the town preferred women quiet. And if Eliza wished to return to her daughter's life, she would have to do it slowly, truthfully, and with the child's safety held higher than her own longing. For that one evening, nobody left. Nobody chased. Nobody forced forgiveness. They only stood by the lamps, letting the small flames teach them what healing had been trying to say all along. A home was not proved by who arrived with the strongest claim. It was proved by who stayed gentle when the heart was most afraid. Eliza did not ask to see Ruthie the next day. That mattered. Miriam had expected a note before breakfast, or a knock at the washhouse door, or some trembling request sent through the depot boy. She had prepared herself for it while stirring oats. Jonah had prepared himself too. He moved with a careful stiffness, as if bracing for a blow that might come from any direction. But no message came. Ruthie noticed. She pretended not to at first. She set Blue beside her bowl, checked that Jonah ate, and reminded him that the mill was finished now, so he had no excuse to argue with logs. Jonah told her he would spend the morning repairing the second wash bench, then carry clean sheets to the depot boarding house. "You stay close?" Ruthie asked. "Close enough to hear Miriam scold me." Ruthie looked satisfied. "That is close." Miriam raised an eyebrow. "My scolding has become a measuring tool." "It reaches far," Jonah said. Ruthie almost laughed, almost. Then her eyes slid toward the door. Miriam saw the question waiting there. "She may write later," Miriam said gently. Ruthie's mouth tightened. "I didn't ask." "No, I did." The child looked down at her spoon. "Good." After breakfast, the washhouse filled with work. Not the lively full room of the day before, but a quieter sort of labor. Ada came early and brought Matthew. Mrs. Kessler arrived with her baby asleep in a sling. Mrs. Dobbins carried down a stack of pillowcases and a warning that 2 drummers from Kansas City had complained about collars stiff enough to cut the neck. "They asked for starch," Miriam said. "They asked to look important," Mrs. Dobbins replied. "There is a difference." Jonah was outside planing boards for the new wash bench when Reverend Sutter appeared at the alley gate. Miriam saw him from the doorway and felt her stomach tighten. He did not look alarmed, only thoughtful. That was sometimes worse. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "Mr. Mercer." Jonah set down the plane. "Reverend." The minister stepped beneath the drying shed roof. "Mrs. Eliza Mercer came to see me this morning." Ruthie, who had been sorting clothespins near the table, went very still. Jonah wiped sawdust from his hands. "What did she want?" "To leave something in my care." Miriam watched Ruthie's small face. Her eyes had gone wide, but she did not move closer. Reverend Sutter drew an envelope from inside his coat. A letter for Ruthie. She said the child need not read it now, or ever. She said only that it should exist where it cannot be lost to fear. Jonah looked at the envelope as if it were burning. Miriam understood. Letters had already shaped too much of their lives. Her mother's letter had stolen years. Jonah's kept letter had reopened truth. Now Eliza had written one, and nobody knew whether it would heal or harm. Ruthie stood up. "Is it sugared bread?" she asked. The minister's face softened. "No, child, only words." "Words can be worse." "Yes," he said, "they can." No one spoke for a moment after that. Then Ruthie walked to Miriam and took her hand. "You read first." Miriam looked at Jonah. "That should be your choice." Jonah shook his head slowly. Ruthie made it hers. The little girl lifted her chin. "Miriam reads first, then Papa, then maybe me." Reverend Sutter handed the envelope to Miriam. Her name was not written on it. Only Ruthie Mercer in careful dark letters. Miriam did not open it in front of the room. She took Ruthie into the small back corner, behind the hanging sheets, where the light came soft through cotton. Jonah followed but stood a few feet away until Ruthie beckoned him closer. Miriam broke the seal. The letter was short. She read silently first, just as Ruthie had asked. The words blurred once, and she blinked them clear. Dear Ruthie, I am writing because I once left without leaving words, and that was wrong. I will not do that again. I am in Silver Creek today, and I will remain at Mrs. Bell's boarding room until Sunday. I will not come to the washhouse unless your father and Mrs. Vale say it is right, and unless you want it. You do not owe me a visit. You do not owe me a smile. You do not owe me forgiveness. When I left, you were little. That does not make the leaving smaller. I was sick in ways I did not understand, but I still hurt you. I am sorry for the morning I promised sugared bread and did not return. I remember that you liked blue things even when they were brown. I remember you slept with one foot outside the blanket. I remember you called birds sky chickens. I remember loving you. I also remember failing you. If someday you wish to know me again, I will come slowly. If you do not, I will still be glad you are safe. Your mama, Eliza. Miriam lowered the letter. Ruthie stared at her. Is it bad? No, Miriam whispered. It is sad but not bad. Did she ask me to go? No. Did she say sorry? Yes. For bread? Yes, for bread too. Ruthie's eyes filled but no tears fell. Read that part. Miriam read only the line about the sugared bread. Ruthie's face twisted. Again. Miriam read it again. Ruthie took this in like medicine she disliked but needed. Then she reached for Jonah. He knelt at once, and Miriam handed him the letter. Jonah read it slowly. His face changed several times: pain, anger, grief, relief, and something like pity. When he finished, he folded it with care. She did not make excuses, he said. Ruthie looked at him sharply. She said, sick. That is a reason, not an excuse. The child frowned. What is different? Jonah sat on the floor because there was no easy way to answer from above her. A reason tells where the hurt came from, he said. An excuse tells someone they should not be hurt. Ruthie thought about that, thumb rubbing Blue's back. I am still hurt. Yes, Jonah said, you are allowed. She looked at Miriam. Put it where? The letter. Ruthie nodded. Miriam thought of the flour tin, the ledger, the lamp, and all the places people tried to keep what mattered safe. Not the flour tin. That is for feelings, not papers. Button jar. We have no button jar yet. Ruthie looked toward the crate Mr. Crenshaw had brought. Make one. So Miriam took a small chipped jar from the crate, washed it, dried it, and placed the folded letter inside. Ruthie added one blue thread from Miriam's sewing basket, because the horse was blue inside and the letter needed to remember. Jonah added nothing. He only rested his hand on the table beside the jar, close but not touching. The jar was set on the shelf near the lamp. Not hidden. Not opened. Waiting. By noon, the washhouse had returned to work, though not the same as before. Something quiet had moved through the room. Ada wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist when she thought no one saw. Mrs. Dobbins muttered about steam but left a small apple beside Ruthie's lunch plate. After dinner, Ruthie asked if Eliza was eating too. Jonah answered honestly, I do not know. Does Mrs. Bell cook? I expect so. Is the room cold? Maybe a little. Ruthie looked toward the stove. She can have soup. Jonah went still. Miriam did too. Ruthie noticed both of them. Not here. All right, Jonah said carefully. In a pail, Papa can take it. Miriam can put bread, I don't go. Jonah looked at his daughter, as though watching a sunrise he had not earned. You want to send soup? Ruthie shrugged too hard. People get hungry when sad. Miriam turned quickly to the stove. Yes, they do. She filled a small pail with bean soup and wrapped 3 slices of bread in cloth. Ruthie watched every movement with fierce seriousness. No sugared bread, she said. No sugared bread, Miriam promised. Jonah took the pail near dusk. Before he left, Ruthie handed him the folded rule paper. Still rules. Still rules, he said. He returned less than an hour later with the empty pail and a message written on the back of an old receipt. Thank you, I will wait where I am told. Ruthie asked Miriam to read it twice. Then she placed the receipt in the jar too. That night, Silver Creek turned colder. Wind moved along the alley and rattled the drying lines. Miriam lit both lamps while Jonah bolted the door. Ruthie sat at the table drawing crooked circles on scrap paper. She said they were not pictures. They were maps of places where feelings could sit without crowding each other. After Ruthie fell asleep, Miriam stepped outside to take in the last of the dry cloth before frost stiffened it. Jonah followed. The town was quiet. A few stars showed above the rooflines. From the depot came a faint whistle, but no train arrived. Jonah leaned against the post of the repaired shed. You helped my daughter send kindness to the woman who hurt her. No, Miriam said. Ruthie found the kindness. I only found the pail. He smiled faintly, then looked toward the window. I do not understand her heart. You are not meant to own every room inside it. His gaze returned to her. Do you think I should let Eliza see her again before Sunday? I think Ruthie should decide tomorrow, after sleeping on the letter. And if she says yes, then we write rules again. And if she says no, then no means no. Jonah nodded slowly. For a while, they listened to the wind. Miriam wrapped her shawl tighter. Jonah noticed and took one step as if to offer warmth, then stopped himself. That careful restraint touched her more than if he had wrapped his arms around her without asking. She looked at him. You may stand closer, it is cold. He did. Not too close. Just near enough that the space between them changed. Miriam, he said quietly, when all this settles, if it ever settles, I would like to court you properly. Her heart struck hard. She looked at the alley shadows rather than his face. Properly. Yes, with permission asked, Sunday walks if you allow them, and no assuming because we share a roof and old sorrow. The old sorrow, the new roof, the child inside, Eliza waiting across town, Edwin's grave on the hill. Miriam felt all of it at once, not as a tangle this time, but as the true weight of a life that could not be made simple for romance's sake. I do not know when I will be ready, she said. I know. I may move slow. I have learned to respect slow. She glanced at him. Have you? I am learning. The honesty made her smile. Not a large smile, not young, not foolish. But real. Jonah saw it and did not reach for more. Inside, Ruthie murmured in her sleep. Miriam turned toward the window automatically. Jonah did too. The 2 lamps glowed beside the jar that held Eliza's letter, and the first answer Ruthie had chosen to send. Miriam thought then that maybe home was not the place where the past never entered. Maybe home was where the past had to knock, where children could make rules, where grief could sit in a jar, where no one was hurried into forgiveness, and where a man asking to court a widow could stand close in the cold without taking 1 inch more than she gave. The next morning, Ruthie would decide whether to see her mother again. Sunday would come after that. Pike might still find new trouble. The town might still twist its mouth around their names. Eliza might stay or leave. Jonah's work might rise or fail. Miriam's laundry might grow into something that could hold them all, or collapse beneath the weight of too many hopes. Nothing was certain. But for once, uncertainty did not feel like emptiness. It felt like a road they might walk together slowly, with a lamp ahead and a child's rules folded carefully in hand. Sunday came with church bells and a sky full of soft winter light. Ruthie woke early, but she did not speak right away. She sat on the cot beneath the quilt, holding Blue in one hand and Eliza's letter jar in the other. The little lantern rested on the sill beside Miriam's lamp, both dark now in the morning, their glass chimneys catching pale gold from the window. Jonah watched his daughter from the table. Miriam stirred oats at the stove and did not hurry the room. Some mornings were too important for grown people to fill with words. At last Ruthie climbed down from the cot and carried the jar to the table. She set it in the center, where everyone could see the folded letter inside and the blue thread curled against the glass. "I thought," she said. Jonah put down his coffee. "All right." Ruthie looked at Miriam. "I can see Mama again." Jonah's shoulders eased and tightened at the same time. Miriam sat slowly across from the child. "Today." Ruthie nodded, but not in the square. "Where?" Ruthie looked around the washhouse. Her eyes moved from the stove to the tubs, from the folding table to the cot, from the repaired roof outside to the lamp in the window. "Here," she said. Miriam went still. Jonah leaned forward. "Dove, are you sure?" Ruthie rubbed Blue's back with her thumb. "If I get scared, I know where things are." Miriam understood at once. The square had been safe because it was public, but it had not belonged to Ruthie. The washhouse did. She knew which board near the stove creaked. She knew where the flour tin sat. She knew which chair was Jonah's, which hook held Miriam's shawl, which jar held the letter. She knew the door, the bolt, the lamp. A child wounded by leaving did not always need wide-open spaces. Sometimes she needed the room that had stayed. Jonah looked at Miriam, asking without asking. Miriam's heart trembled. Eliza in this room would change it. The washhouse had become Ruthie's shelter, Jonah's beginning, Miriam's brave little world. Letting Eliza cross its threshold felt risky, like opening a window in a storm. But Ruthie had chosen it. And love could not become another locked door. "All right," Miriam said. "Here." Ruthie nodded once, then reached for the scrap paper from the shelf. Rules. They wrote them after breakfast. Eliza may come after church bells stop. Eliza must knock. Eliza may sit in the chair by the door. Ruthie may sit wherever she wants. Papa stays. Miriam stays. No touching unless Ruthie asks. No asking Ruthie to leave. No sugared bread. If Ruthie says enough, the visit ends. Jonah read the rules twice, then took them to Mrs. Bell's boarding room before the church bell finished its second ringing. Miriam stayed behind with Ruthie, who insisted on helping sweep the floor even though the broom was taller than she was. "You do not have to make the room perfect," Miriam said. Ruthie pushed a line of dust toward the door. "I wanted to know." "The room." "Yes." "What should it know?" Ruthie looked around. "That it is still ours." Miriam had to turn toward the stove. By 10 o'clock, Silver Creek's church bell began calling people to worship. Main Street grew quiet in that Sunday way, as if the town had washed its face and hidden the dirt behind its ears. Miriam expected Ruthie to ask about church, but the child only stood at the window, watching the street. Jonah returned before the bell stopped. "She agreed," he said, "all the rules." Ruthie did not turn. Was she sad? Yes. Was she mad? No. Did she have bread? No. Only then did Ruthie face him. Good. They waited. Waiting was different now. It did not have the wild terror of Jonah's first day at the mill. It was heavy, yes, but steadier. Ruthie placed Blue on the table. She took him off. She put him in the flour tin, then removed him again almost immediately. "Not today," she told him. Miriam set soup to warm because hands needed tasks. Jonah repaired a loose chair leg because his worry always looked for wood, nails, or rope. Ruthie folded 3 handkerchiefs with great care and placed them on the cot in a row. When the church bell finally fell silent, a knock came at the door. Not loud. Not demanding. 3 soft taps. Ruthie grabbed Miriam's hand. Jonah stood, but he did not move to the door until Ruthie nodded. He opened it. Eliza stood outside in the clean Sunday light. She wore a plain gray dress today. Her hair was pinned neatly beneath a simple bonnet. Her hands were empty, as promised. She looked first at Jonah, then past him to Ruthie, but she did not step inside. "May I come in?" she asked. Ruthie's grip tightened around Miriam's fingers. "Yes," the child whispered. Jonah stepped aside. Eliza entered the washhouse as though walking into a church where every board was holy and breakable. She stopped just inside the door. Her eyes moved over the room, the steaming pot, the tubs, the quilt, the lamps, the jars, the patched clothes, the humble evidence of ordinary care. Then she saw Blue on the table. Her mouth trembled, but she kept silent. Miriam gestured to the chair by the door. "You may sit there." "Thank you," Eliza said. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Ruthie did not sit at first. She stood beside Miriam, half hidden in her skirt, watching the woman who had once been mourning, bread, songs, and leaving. Jonah remained near the table, close enough for Ruthie to reach. For a while no one spoke. Then Ruthie asked, "Did you get soup?" Eliza nodded. "Yes, thank you." "It had beans." "It did. I like beans sometimes. I remember you liked them better if your papa mashed them." Ruthie looked at Jonah suspiciously. "You mashed?" Jonah nodded. "When you were small." "I am still small." "Yes," he said softly, "but less." Ruthie seemed to accept that. Eliza kept her hands folded. The soup was very good. "Miriam made it." Eliza looked at Miriam. There was no jealousy in her expression now, only humility and something that looked like grief mixed with gratitude. "Then thank you, Mrs. Vale." Miriam gave a small nod. "You are welcome." Ruthie climbed onto Jonah's chair but did not sit in his lap. She pulled her knees up and held Blue against them. "Why did you not write before?" she asked. Eliza closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she answered plainly, "Because I was afraid you would hate me." Ruthie frowned. "I did sometimes." "I understand. But hate goes in the flour tin." Eliza glanced toward Miriam's shelf, where the tin sat beside the flour sack. "That seems like a wise place." "It gets full." "I expect it does." Ruthie looked down. "If you wrote, maybe it would be less full." Eliza's face changed and tears filled her eyes. She did not wipe them right away. "You are right." The room held that truth quietly. Jonah looked at the floor, jaw tight. Ruthie traced Blue's cracked back. "Are you going away again?" Eliza took a slow breath. "I am leaving Silver Creek tomorrow." Ruthie's body stiffened. Jonah looked sharply at Eliza, but she lifted one hand slightly, asking to finish. "I am going back to Trinidad," Eliza said. "I have work there, a room, people who help me stay steady. If I remain here only because I want to be near you, I may start wanting too fast. You deserve slow." Ruthie stared at her. Eliza continued, voice shaking but clear. "I would like to write letters, only if you want them. I would like your papa or Mrs. Vale to read them first if that helps. Someday, maybe, I could visit again, but I will not ask you to live with me. Not now. Ever? Ruthie asked. Eliza looked as though the word hurt, but she did not run from it. I do not know what years will bring, but I know this. You are safe with your papa. You are safe here. I will not pull you from safety to mend my loneliness. Miriam felt the tears come before she could stop them. Jonah turned away, one hand over his mouth. Ruthie slid down from the chair. Slowly, she walked to the shelf and took the jar with Eliza's letter. She carried it to her mother and held it out. Eliza looked confused. Do you want me to take it? No, Ruthie held it closer. Open. Eliza's hands shook as she opened the jar. Ruthie took out the blue thread and placed it in Eliza's palm. For your letters, she said, so they know where to come. Eliza broke then, but quietly. She bent her head over the blue thread and cried without reaching for the child. Ruthie watched her for a long moment. Then she took one step closer. You can touch blue, she said. Eliza froze. Are you sure? Ruthie held out the wooden horse. Eliza touched the toy's back with 2 fingers, so gently it was almost nothing. Hello, Blue, she whispered. Ruthie's mouth trembled. He is still mad, medium. I will be patient. Then Ruthie did something no one expected. She leaned forward and touched Eliza's sleeve. Only the sleeve, only for a second. But Eliza looked at that tiny hand, as if heaven itself had rested there. Enough, Ruthie whispered. Eliza pulled her hand back at once. Enough. Jonah moved to his daughter and Ruthie let him lift her. She leaned against his shoulder, exhausted by bravery. Eliza stood. Thank you for today. Jonah's voice was rough. I will send word through Reverend Sutter. I will answer through him. Miriam walked her to the door. For a moment the 2 women stood facing one another, first love and wife, widow and mother, not rivals, not friends, not simple anything, just 2 women shaped by different sorrows, both trying now not to harm the same child. Eliza spoke softly. She reaches for you when frightened. Miriam did not know what to say. Eliza nodded, tears shining again. I am grateful she has someone to reach for. Then she stepped into the Sunday light and walked away. Ruthie watched from Jonah's arms until Eliza turned the corner. She did not run back, Ruthie said. No, Jonah whispered, she did not. She stopped when I said enough. Yes. Ruthie rested her head on his shoulder. Maybe next letter can say sky chickens. Jonah laughed through tears. I think she would like that. That afternoon, Miriam went to church. She did not plan it. She simply found herself changing into her dark dress after Ruthie fell asleep from the morning strain. Jonah looked up from sanding the new wash bench. You are going? Yes. Do you want us to come? Miriam looked at Ruthie sleeping on the cot, then at Jonah. Not today, she said. Today I need to sit for myself. He nodded. Then we will be here when you return. The words were gentle, ordinary everything. Miriam walked to church beneath a bright cold sky. People looked when she entered. Of course they did. Mrs. Albright saw her first and moved her skirts to make room. Ada Whitcomb smiled from the next pew. Reverend Sutter paused only a fraction before beginning the hymn, but Miriam saw the kindness in his eyes. She sat down. For the first time in years, she did not feel like a widow occupying the space where a wife had been. She did not feel like a woman waiting to be judged clean enough to remain. She felt tired, uncertain, bruised by life and alive. When the congregation sang, Miriam did not sing at first. Then on the second verse, her voice came. Small, rusty, real. After church, she visited Edwin's grave. The cemetery sat on the hill above Silver Creek, where the wind moved through dry grass and wooden markers leaned under the weather. Edwin Vale's stone was modest. Miriam had scrubbed it clean the previous spring, but dust had gathered again in the carved letters. She knelt and brushed it away with her glove. "I have been lonely," she said softly. The wind moved over the hill. "I think you knew that before I did." Edwin had been a good man. He had deserved a whole heart, and Miriam had given him the best pieces she had left at the time. He had never asked about Jonah after their wedding. He had never punished her for old sadness. In his quiet way, he had made room for the truth he could sense but not name. "I am trying to live kindly," she whispered. "Not perfectly, just kindly." She stayed a little longer. Then she rose and walked back down the hill. When Miriam returned to the washhouse, the lamp was already lit though dusk had barely begun. Ruthie was awake and sitting at the table with paper in front of her. Jonah sat beside her, helping hold the pencil but not guiding it. "We are writing," Ruthie announced. Miriam removed her shawl. "To whom?" "Mama." Jonah looked at Miriam over the child's head. His eyes were tired but peaceful. Ruthie bent over the page. The letters were large, crooked, and mostly Jonah's, but the words were hers. "Dear Mama. Blue says hello. He is still mad medium but not big. I like beans sometimes. I call birds sky chickens still. The lamp is good. Do not send sugared bread yet. Ruthie." She asked Miriam to read it back 3 times. Then she folded it and placed it beside the jar. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," Jonah agreed. Winter approached Silver Creek slowly after that, one cold morning at a time. Eliza left on the Monday train. She did not come to the washhouse again, but she sent one note before departure, thanking Ruthie for the blue thread and promising not to write too often. Reverend Sutter carried it himself. Ruthie placed it in the jar after Miriam read it aloud. Jonah did not take the freight office job. He stayed at the laundry. At first, Pike watched for failure. He looked for smoke, scandal, unpaid rent, broken rules. What he found instead was profit. The hotel linens grew famous among travelers. The depot boarding house signed a standing order. Mrs. Albright brought lace from 3 households. Mr. Crenshaw began sending customers with a sign in his mercantile window that read, "Clean laundry taken behind Pike Hotel." Pike hated the sign. He liked the rent too much to remove it. By the first snowfall, Miriam's washhouse had changed beyond recognition. Jonah built 2 proper benches and shelves along the wall. Ada became the steady morning hand. Mrs. Kessler handled mending when her baby slept. Matthew delivered small bundles after school for a penny a trip. Mrs. Dobbins kept the ledger when Miriam's hands were too wet, though she complained every time and never made an error. Ruthie grew sturdier. Not all at once. Some mornings she still woke afraid. Some evenings a late wagon or distant train whistle made her quiet. But now she had words for the fear. She had a flour tin for feelings. She had a jar for letters. She had a lamp that stayed lit and people who came back when they said they would. Eliza wrote once a month. Her letters were careful. She never asked too much. She told Ruthie about work weather, a cat at the boarding house, and once a bird outside her window that looked nothing like a chicken but behaved proudly enough to be one. Ruthie sometimes answered. Sometimes she did not. No one forced her. That was part of the healing, too. One evening in December, snow fell thick over Main Street. The washhouse was warm and crowded with clean steam. Jonah had just brought in the last bucket of coal. Ruthie sat by the stove teaching Blue and her little lantern, a hymn she had half learned at church. Miriam stood at the folding table, counting coins from the week's orders. For the first time since Edwin died, there was money left after rent, food, soap, and oil. Not much, but enough. Jonah came beside her. "You are smiling at coins." "I am smiling at breathing room. That is finer than gold." She looked up at him. Snow clung to his hat brim. His hands were rough and red from cold. His face, once hollow with fear, had filled out some over the months, not younger, better than younger, present. "You stayed," she said. He grew still. "Yes." "You kept coming back." "Yes." "You let Ruthie go slow." "I am still learning." "You asked to court me properly." His eyes softened. "I did." Miriam looked toward Ruthie. The child was making blue bow to the little lantern after the hymn. The room glowed around her, poor and warm and alive. Then Miriam looked back at Jonah. "You may walk me to church this Sunday," she said. His face changed so deeply and quietly that she nearly looked away. "I would be honored," he said. "And you may hold my hand if I offer it." "I will wait." "I know." That was why she smiled. Sunday came clear and cold. Jonah wore his mended coat. Ruthie wore the yellow ribbon, now stitched at the frayed end by Mrs. Kessler. Miriam wore her dark dress and Edwin's shawl, not from grief alone now, but from gratitude for every life that had led her to this one. They walked to church together. Not as a perfect family. Not as a story without pain. As three people still healing, still learning, still choosing the next right step. At the church door, Ruthie slipped one hand into Jonah's and the other into Miriam's. Miriam felt Jonah look at her. She offered her free hand. He took it carefully. No thunder sounded, no grand music rose. The town did not suddenly become kinder in every heart, but Mrs. Albright smiled. Ada waved from a pew. Reverend Sutter's eyes warmed. Mrs. Dobbins pretended not to notice anything while making sure no one sat in their place. And when Ruthie climbed between Jonah and Miriam in the pew, she leaned against Miriam's side without asking if she would stay. That was the miracle. Years later, people in Silver Creek still spoke of the laundry behind the old Pike Hotel. They spoke of how it became Vale and Mercer Laundry after Jonah and Miriam married in the spring of 1888, beneath cottonwood leaves and a sky washed clean by rain. They spoke of how Ruthie stood between them during the vows, holding blue in one hand and the little lantern in the other. They spoke of how Mrs. Dobbins cried into a handkerchief and claimed coal smoke had troubled her eyes. Eliza came that spring too. She sat in the back of the church as Ruthie had requested and left a small blue ribbon on the gift table. Ruthie did not run to her. Not then. But before Eliza boarded the afternoon train, Ruthie allowed one careful hug, short and trembling, with Jonah kneeling beside them and Miriam standing near enough to be seen. Healing remained slow. But slow things could still be real. The laundry grew through the years. Women found work there when life left them few respectable choices. Children napped beneath tables while their mothers earned coins. Travelers came for clean shirts and left speaking of the lamp in the window. Miriam kept lighting it every night, not because the room was empty anymore, but because someone on the road might need to see that warmth existed somewhere. Ruthie grew tall. She stopped putting blue in the flour tin, though she kept him on a shelf above her bed. Eliza's letters stayed in the jar until the jar became too small, then moved into a wooden box Jonah made from pine. Some letters made Ruthie happy. Some made her quiet. All of them were hers to open or leave closed. When Ruthie was 12, she asked why Miriam had let Jonah and her inside that first morning. Miriam was folding sheets by the window. Her hands had grown stronger in some places and stiffer in others. Jonah was outside repairing the delivery cart. Snow fell lightly beyond the glass. Ruthie stood beside the lamp, no longer a little girl, yet still carrying the same searching eyes. Miriam thought for a long time before answering. "Because you asked if it was safe," she said, "and I wanted, just once in my life, to make the answer true." Ruthie leaned against her shoulder. "You did," she whispered. Miriam looked out at Jonah in the yard. He glanced up as if feeling her gaze and smiled. The years had touched his hair with silver at the temples. His shoulders were still strong. His eyes still carried sorrow, but no longer only sorrow. They carried home. Miriam reached for Ruthie's hand and held it. Their life had not begun cleanly. It had been made from old letters, broken promises, hunger, fear, gossip, and one small lamp burning behind a hotel. It had required patience from the wounded, humility from the guilty, courage from the lonely, and mercy from people who had every reason to close their doors. But love, Miriam learned, was not always the first promise made. Sometimes it was the promise kept after many had failed. Sometimes it was a father coming back dirty and tired because a child needed proof. Sometimes it was a mother learning to love from a distance until trust could bear her nearness. Sometimes it was a widow opening a washhouse door, not because she had no anger left, but because a hungry child stood on the other side. And sometimes home was not a ranch, a fine house, or a perfect name. Sometimes home was a warm room full of steam, a flour tin for heavy feelings, a jar of letters, a wooden horse that was blue inside, and a lamp in the window saying to every lost heart on the road, "Come in slowly. You are safe here. We will not make you leave before breakfast."